Okay, first item on the agenda is going to be the animal related regulations, and Mr. Cody Bird is going to present.
Perfect, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to start real briefly too. At my side here is Kelly Dykstra. Kelly is our building official for the town, and he also oversees supervision of the neighborhood services officer. He's been pretty involved in a lot of the research, digging into some of these topics, and has been responding to some of the questions that come up when and so we need some backup on that. So I invited Kelly along. One, it's good to get him some exposure and make sure everyone remembers who he is, and two, he's very knowledgeable on this topic as well. So kind of just wanted to do that real quickly. I'm going to share my. Well, I keep looking at that screen. On
Do you
the,
want it up there?
no, that's fine. On the meeting, I'm sharing my screen so anyone can follow along. Oops, I clicked the wrong button. Sorry about that. So there we go. And I've got a couple of print copies if anyone wants one. So there's probably more information in the slides and the supporting materials than we need to go over at length. I know that you've had an opportunity to read all of it. So my intent is to kind of capture the high level background and kind of some of the findings that we found through doing this policy research based on the topics the board asked us to dig into from the March 26th meeting on this topic. Feel free to stop me if there's a question about something that I'm sharing, or if you want to discuss that. I don't intend to present everything and then turn it over for questions. I'd encourage you to kind of stop throughout as the matter kind of flows. So just as a quick background, March 26th meeting.
Before you start, how much for wait for that thing? Should we wait till you're done? I don't want to interrupt you during the time.
You know, Mayor, I leave it up to you. I'm not going to be offended if it's kind of part of the discussion. It might be more organic if there's a topic that you want to speak to it then, as opposed to hold it till the end and try and remember the topics.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion if that's agreeable to the board.
Yeah, I think ultimately we'll let Cody speak his piece, and then we'll have you speak afterwards.
Okay.
And then we can have conversation with all input.
Okay, we'll get off. That's fine. Easier for me too.
I'm allowed some chairs so they can come sit at the table.
Yeah, you won't be over there.
Okay.
I'll stay over here.
It doesn't matter. That way you're on Zoom, and if comments are heard and things, yeah,
I'm nervous on camera. It's okay.
you'll be fine.
Sounds good. Thank you. Sharon's. So just to kind of give a quick refresher, at the March 20th meeting, when this topic was before the board last, there was some direction given to staff to dig into some of these policy topics. So this was just the slides from that meeting. These were the topics identified by the board as needing some additional research. Just for note in your packet, I did move the feasibility of off-leash parks and fetch zones to the end of the presentation just because it kind of helped with the flow. So that one's out of order. And then the board also gave direction to seek community engagement on the topic in the form of survey with the ranking matrix and leaving space for open-ended responses. Included in your packet were the responses from this latest survey, including different ranking and of importance on those topics, and leaving room for open-ended questions. Open-ended responses are in your packet as well. And we also included the first survey from February with some of the open-ended questions and responses that were asked earlier in this process. So we had 159 respondents. It's not a huge number in terms of our 12,000 population, but the survey was out for nearly 4 weeks. So it had plenty of exposure, and we've advertised and we put posters up around town. So we feel like we got a good response for an online survey, but knowing that it is 159 respondents, it's not representative of everyone in town. So the way I've structured this presentation, I've kind of broken these slides out by topics with a little bit of background to them, beginning with the alternate impoundment locations. As town staff dug into this topic, what we found is that animal shelter facilities are the appropriate license type defined by the state. The division of our Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services Division is the group tasked with administering PACFA, the Pet Animal Care Facilities Act, which is state statute. There's also a whole subset of regulations adopted by the Department of Agriculture in terms of how they regulate and enforce the statutory provisions. It's quite lengthy, but only a small portion of it relates to animal care facilities. The animal shelter facilities specifically, very highly regulated in terms of its design, separation, air exchanges and other things relative to hosting stray animals and impounding animals via enforcement or for adoption. So I don't put a lot of details on that in here because that is a state agency that regulates it, but there are pretty onerous requirements there. What we did find is that there are not currently any animal shelter facilities in Wellington that are licensed. So there's not currently an alternative impoundment location available in Wellington. We have heard interest expressed by local operators to pursue some options there that could become available in the future. Just kind of working through some of the considerations that we looked at. The practices for contacting owners was one of the top subcontexts that the board wanted us to dig into. So what we're presenting in this slide is how that operates for NOCO Humane, since that's who our contract is currently with. They do make every effort to reasonably contact owners for an animal that has a microchip or other form of identification. Their policy is to find the owner, get the animal back to its owner first. If that owner is not available, then they will take the animal to their shelter facility and care for that animal until the owner can come and pick it up. If the animal if its owner can't be identified, then they follow their normal procedures they take the animal, they hold it for a period of at least 5 days. They do put information on their website that has a picture of the animal, descriptions, and when it came in, so that owners looking for their lost pets have an opportunity to find it. Only then, after the mandatory 5 days, would they move to adoption of that animal if it's not claimed by its owner. The board also asked about some timing considerations. NOCO Humane is open Monday through Friday and Saturday and Sunday, so 7 days a week coverage, a little bit longer into the evening to allow opportunities for homeowners to go and retrieve their animals. That was important when we were considering the facility operations for a contract with the town. As I mentioned, there's no local operators currently in Wellington, but there is a desire to pursue that by some local operators. I mentioned the 5-day mandatory waiting period before animals can.
You're a little bit out of sequence.
I'm sorry. And just some kind of helpful information, just in terms of quantifying some of the timing. In 2023, there were 354 impoundment days that NOCO provided. So at least it helps us quantify kind of where we're at currently in terms of need and timeline for how long animals are staying. What I put in this presentation are some of the selected survey responses relative to the impoundment locations. Probably not surprisingly, recovering lost pets, safety of the pets scored very high on the importance scale, very important, as did how the animals are handled when they're in the care of the custodians. Interestingly, the cost of service for recovering lost pets and the distance to where the facility where the pets are held was much more spread out in terms of response on that scale. So kind of there's a clear importance for safety and recovering pets, and the other factors were a little bit more mixed. Patrol practices was another topic of the board. As we've kind of discussed before, NOCO Humane is available 8 hours per day, 5 days per week via the contract that we currently have with them. They also provide emergency services outside the normal business hours, weekends, nights. If it's an emergency, they will respond. And as I mentioned before too, officers are most interested in getting pets back to their owners. The violations are last resort. Compliance is always preferred. And we did see in the survey responses that there is a desire amongst the respondents of those surveys to see an increase to the level of enforcement. And the presence alone of NOCO humane and patrol vehicles, would help to remind people that there are rules in place to be on your best behavior when you're in your, when you take your animals to parks and public spaces, that you need to be cognizant. There are, entities out there, and that vehicle is a good reminder. As I mentioned, the contract for NOCO humane, when an animal's in custody, their practice is to get the animal back to its owner. They will take it back only when take it back to the shelter only when no other solution exists. And I mentioned a minute ago the lost and found pets, and here's a couple of screenshots. The picture to the right, we've also put this poster up on the town's website on our bulletin boards, and provided that poster to local animal care facilities to have that for display. You'll see on this chart from the survey, this was the question regarding customer service interaction. You might note that there were fewer respondents on this. Many of the responses we got were not applicable or none. And so just for ease of readability, we moved those out and just showed the responses that were responses other than NA or none. And most of the majority of respondents that answered something were professional, pleasant, or respectful, and one unprofessional and a couple of unpleasant interactions. We didn't ask for qualifying why that they chose that. Well, I think we did as we were opening the responses. So I realize I need to move a little faster here as I'm talking more than I intended, but clear process and procedures. We do have information on working with NOCO Humane to put that information on their websites where it can be read and clear. And we link that from the town's NSO, the Neighborhood Services Officer page. So you can see this screenshot shows some of the common animal control matters that are on that, including when you click on those drop downs, very detailed explanations of what it means, what you can do, how to contact agencies, where to go, how to license your pets. It's a pretty robust bit of information to guide residents that are interested in how to do that. And that is far more robust that we've added that since we've joined with NOCO Humane and had them host that information using our local rules and regulations to create that content. Animal at large was another topic that the board asked for staff to dig into. This was also on the first survey, one of the most commonly cited needs, that the animal at large was a big concern amongst residents that responded to that first survey. On this slide, these are definitions copied from the municipal code. So animal at large is quite simply any animal that's not contained or in control of its owner. And we added the definition for control, which currently under Wellington Municipal Code is identified as an animal that must be on a leash or lead, not more than 6 feet in length. So that is the current requirement in Wellington. It's not dissimilar from other regulations that we also researched, and we'll get into that a little bit when we talk about off-leash park areas.
Quick question, is that, it just says animals, not specific to cats or dogs or anything?
Correct.
So it's applicable to cats?
Yep, and goats, sheep,
Yeah.
you know,
Chicken.
chickens.
Okay.
I'm riding horses on not a leash, I'm on riding.
Bareback without bridles?
Yes, is that a bridle? Is that animal large?
Is a bridle elite?
Yeah, exactly. Let's dig into it.
So, and it is intentionally broad, and for a number of reasons that may or may not come up in every situation.
Right.
Whether it's a dog, a cat, a chicken, if they're at large, one of the concerns we hear a lot about is that animals in the street, it's safety.
Yeah.
That it could get hit, or the safety of other drivers if they're swerving out of to not hit an animal, are they creating endangerment for other drivers or pedestrians or other concerns. And so it is intentionally broad to cover a broad range of circumstances, as we'll dig into a little bit here in a minute. We'll talk about enforcement and limits of those offenses. One of the questions that was asked by the board is, are there different categories of animal at large? And the response we have here, in addition to those definitions, it is defined rather broadly for the reasons I just stated and others. It's really hard for any enforcement officer to discern how the animal got out, when the primary concern is, let's make sure it's not in the road and getting hit. Let's make sure that people are safe. Let's make sure the animal is safe. How it got out or how it became at large is subsequent, to the primary, let's take care of the situation. And whether it's because the gate was broken, the wind blew the fence down, or the front door was open, whatever the circumstances were, it doesn't solve, we need to take care of that animal.
Cody, I have a question for you.
Thank you,
On
Trustee.
the, when you talk about the animal at large, say, so we have a lot of families that have dogs that will stay out in the front yard, that run on a electric, like an invisible fence. What says that as far as if someone allows their animal into the front yard, the animal is not being observed physically, but they run on electric fence? Do you consider that contained for the definition?
I think that's a great question, Trustee Teets. Our code does not get that explicit. It does define must be contained. So I'm gonna go back to that definition. Whether on public or private property, I'm sorry, means the definition for animal at large means any animal outside of a fence or other enclosure which restrains the animal to a particular premises. So I think that would be included in that definition if it's an electric or invisible fence. Whether or not the enforcement officer can see it or understand it, I think that would be a reasonable conversation for the owner and the enforcement officer to have if they can demonstrate that they have met that compliance means.
The code talks specifically about physical control, and an electric fence, even though you can't see it, certainly is a form of physical control. So I would think that would apply in that case, but it isn't specifically mentioned. I think everything from the steps are correct.
I've got a quick
Perfect.
question. And I think I've been having my dog running at large quite a bit here lately. I have a retractable lead that might go out 10 feet. So that's a violation.
It could be, if your animal is not causing any problems and you're able to retract that lead back to the 6 foot, if there were an altercation or a concern or keep them out of the road or what have you, I can't imagine why any enforcement officer would stop you if
Okay, I
you're
was
bringing it
just
into
curious
compliance.
about that. So,
Why wouldn't they? One question I have too, sorry, bring it back later too, but with the leash laws, there's places here in town that have bigger yards, so you're saying someone has a 2 acre yard, their dogs are loose in the yard, that's a violation when they're not with it. And that's my question. A lot of people have them hanging out, or cats under the tree hanging out in the shade. That's gonna be a cat that's impounded to my property and get it,
It's in the town of Wellington, an animal that even on your own property, if it's not under your physical control, is running at large, under our code.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the way it
we're gonna
works.
talk about later, changing it, but. so we're
That's the way it's
allowed to
worded right
trespass and
now.
Get it, that's the big thing too.
So you're asking about, a 10-foot lead. I mean, technically under our code, it requires a 6-foot lead. Running at large statute or code section says physical control. I just can't imagine a ticket being written for that. And I'll tell you the town attorney, the town prosecutor is probably not going to push hard to prosecute.
Killer shih tzus too.
But the other thing that,
I've never seen anything even.
but
Your Honor.
to mention what trustee Teets said with the electric fence. If the owner is in the house and somebody doesn't know it's an electric fence and they try to impound the dog, first of all, that would be very painful for the dog because it'll shock them. And so that is a little bit worrisome.
If you know those have those underground fences, maybe encourage them to put signage up to identify that the property is monitored by an electric fence, so that.
Yeah.
That's what
Maybe
I was
that's
gonna
what-
say. If there was something that we could help advise them if they do have an animal at large, not at large, but an animal in their front yard that's running on electric fence, maybe making sure that there's flags set up that kind of identify that there is a fencing system there, just so someone doesn't try to remove the animal. Because if you go and pick up an animal that has one of those collars and you try to remove them, chances are if you're dragging them out, they're going to get hurt and they're going to attack whomever they're near because something is hurting them. It's just a pain response. So if there is a way, and I'm not saying Humane Society probably will be able to identify those collars, but some of the newer ones are kind of hard because the new AirTag collars that you can buy are a large square that look just like the electric fence ones. So maybe having a little excerpt put out saying this is how you can help protect your animals, and if you do utilize front yards that are open with the electric fence, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if we can do something like that when it comes to the town putting out like a little social media post that gives an FYI to help Humane Society, NOCO Humane, identify that those fences are there.
Thanks for that suggestion, trustee Teets. I don't know if you can see me, but I made some notes to follow up on that topic.
And
I
then we'll
did see,
maintain
thank you.
the comments and things for when Chad and you guys present at the
I'm
end.
sorry, I apologize.
Thank you.
So thank you for those comments. To kind of move on from this one of the categories that, under that kind of broad heading of are there different categories of at large, I think that does kind of speak to one of the board's other topics, which is what about off-leash park areas and fetch zones? That could be a different classification of at large, which I have some examples later and I'll circle back to. The board also asked about limits of the offense, and I struggled a little bit with this one because I wasn't going back through my notes. I wasn't really clear on what the intent was, but what I've tried to do is kind of put some numbers to this topic. You saw the definitions for at large and how it was defined. In the first quarter of this year, there were 71 stray animal calls. Of those calls, when NOCO showed up, the animal was no longer there. For most of them, there were some that were already in custody, so they were able to address those. And only one warning was issued for that same time frame. So it is evidence that this is for 1 quarter. This is a topic that comes up fairly frequently. It's hard to enforce because the animals keep moving. Maybe they make it home, maybe they don't. But also evidenced by only 1 warning was issued. That gets to both the challenges of identifying whose owner it is and how to issue the warning. As well as kind of the concern that this is still a problem and it's hard to address. And as
To address kind of how it
Oh,
was in
yeah,
court.
please.
And somewhat anecdotally over the last 4 years,
Oh, yeah.
animal at large calls are something we see in municipal court on a semi-regular basis, but I'll say over the last probably about 4 years, I've only seen 1 case that the animal at large violation wasn't associated with something else. Often it's animal at large because an animal was attacked, or animal at large because there was property damage or something like that. It's, I've only seen 1 incident where there was an animal at large violation written that got to municipal court that didn't have some other associated thing. But of course.
Dan,
that-
how many
that-
warnings do they receive before it becomes a municipal thing?
I wouldn't see that. I only see them if they get to municipal court. So.
Okay.
Based on this information from NOCO Humane, they issue warnings. And I know that's that's been my experience with whether it's LCSO or internal co-compliance. Usually there's warnings. Like I said, we don't see animal at large unless it's some other incident associated with it. So.
Got it. I just know that there was some animals at large that were out multiple times and ended up having caused physical issues to children, multiple different children, to my understanding, over in Buffalo Creek area last year and the year before. So I just didn't know how many issues arose before there was,
It's
it was
certainly on a case-
actually issued into the municipal court.
Certainly on a case-by-case basis, like I said, when I see it, usually it's animal at large plus somebody's been hurt, animal at large, property's been damaged. So that particular one, I'm not sure I saw that incident, but it's possible they just weren't able to find the dogs or something else, so.
Got it.
Usually if somebody is hurt, an animal is hurt, or there's property damage, usually there wouldn't be a warrant with that. That's in that case also, it's running at large plus another offense, so.
Yeah.
Got it.
And that's all really great information that Dan shared. What I would add to that too is that the animal at large provision is in the rules as a tool, more so than a punishment. That if the idea that we saw from our survey results is that animals at large is a concern because my grandkids are out, I have concerns that my own pet could be, injured or hurt. I don't know if that other dog is vaccinated or not, and they're coming and approaching my dog. There's a lot of concerns amongst our community that what could happen if a loose dog got to my kid, my animal, whatever. And so it's a tool in the toolbox for a local humane officer, a neighborhood services officer, LCSO. They can remind people, we don't want something bad to happen. You need to keep your animal under control so that nothing bad does happen. And they use that tool frequently to remind people and issue warnings. Other consequences could become effective if you don't follow these rules.
Got it. I had one additional question related to this, and Cody, correct me if I'm just stepping out of the box here. I know that there is a section in our municipal code that limits how many dogs are allowed to be, well, animals in general. You can have a combination, a total of 3. Is that something we as trustees were going to discuss? Because I mean, there's people I know that own 5 dogs that are fantastic animal owners. And then there's people I know that own 1 dog and are not absolutely fantastic animal owners. So are we sticking with what's in the code with 3 animals? Is that, I know that was something that was discussed before when we were talking about all of this. Are we still staying with the 3 animals?
So thanks for the question, trustee Teets. At this time, staff didn't do any additional research on that because it wasn't one of the policy topics the board asked us to dig into at the March 26th meeting. So currently the existing rules are what are on the books. We haven't researched or recommended any changes to that number. I do know anecdotally that other communities do handle that slightly differently, but every community that I've worked in or researched has some limit to the number of animals.
Got it. And I think I did bring that up previously. It just maybe didn't get added in. But it is something that I just wanted to know if fellow trustees wanted to discuss the total numbers, or because I know as it sits now, we have residents that would probably be in non-compliance related to this.
Mr. Mayor, what I might recommend is we go through the entire presentation, and then if there's additional policy work or ordinance changes you would like for staff to research, we can come back with that, but let's go through the entire presentation. We can hear from Chad and Bill and Dawn and see what their thoughts are, and then you all can give us some direction on how you want us to proceed.
Yeah, so we'll park that for conversation at the end.
Okay, perfect. Parking lot.
Thank you. In this slide just is some of the survey responses regarding animal at large, and you can see there was a pretty high response rate from the public for, animal at large, leash laws, vicious dog, dangerous animal, public safety were all identified very highly as important or very important. So we touched on this a little bit a minute ago. The animal at large is a violation. The topic the board asked for additional information was fine amounts and applicability. So this is a slide again is a copy and paste from the municipal code. And it says that any person found guilty of permitting an animal at large or any other public nuisance is guilty of a petty offense and fined in these identified amounts. So again, this is a kind of a tool in the toolbox. And as we've said before, the town, main LCSO, no one wants to write tickets. We're mostly inclined to help owners find compliance, make sure that people are safe, animals are safe, and move on about the day. Writing tickets even for $250 for a third and subsequent offense, or a second and subsequent offense, is not exactly lucrative for the town or NOCO or LCSO to spend the amount of staff resources to document, prove, send to court, and assess these types of fines and penalties. It's a tool in the toolbox. Which we asked the questions on the survey, and the responses were pretty telling, consistent with what we already knew, but we needed to ask that question. So we asked two different questions. One was, in the past 12 months, have you received a notice of violation? And in the past 12 months, have you received a ticket, fine, and penalty? And overwhelmingly, the responses were no and no. So we do recognize that occasionally cases do go to municipal court. Maybe those individuals didn't take the survey. We recognize not everyone did. And so we acknowledge that there are other responses out there, and we've heard them. We've heard from all of them different ways. But as a whole, writing fines and tickets is not any enforcement officer's goal or desire to find people. Real quickly, there was a question asked about service animals and are they handling differently? The short answer is no. Service animals, while in service, perform a very important duty. If they're not in service and chasing a squirrel, there's really no difference in how that animal is handled in terms of violations. If the animal has any kind of ID on it that identifies it as a service animal, hopefully, we hope, and in all instances for our pets, that they have ID tags or licensed and the officer can get them back to their owner quickly and efficiently, especially for service animals. But if a service animal becomes vicious, it shouldn't be handled any differently than any other instance of a vicious animal. All the rules apply, probably less likely to happen for a service animal, but if it did, we would need to have the same rules in effect. There are a couple of ways in which the municipal code kind of softens the blow for persons with disabilities that have a service animal, and that's primarily in the way of fee waivers for service animals. Interestingly, if a blind person doesn't have to pick up pet waste. I think those are, we researched that on our current code, and those were what we found in terms of how service animals were addressed. Otherwise, the code is pretty silent on the topic. Operating procedures was one of the topics required by the board. This is a graphic that we use in the past, kind of informing this topic and what we have on our website. A larger version of it is on our website, but it identifies who to contact for the different types of functions that NOCO Humane provides, Town of Wellington provides, and Larimer County Sheriff, what they would do and how they are involved. As a general rule, if it's a time-sensitive animal-related issue, you should call NOCO Humane to handle those issues. If it's an emergency, you should call 911. And if it's a non-time-sensitive issue, like animal pen enclosures, my neighbor's got too many chickens, I don't know what to do about beehives, those are questions you can contact the neighborhood services officer, and each one of these parties is well informed and equipped to handle the topics that are identified on the sheet. Licensing procedures, again, from the municipal code, animals within the town limits are required to be licensed, and that license period is annually, so it requires annual renewals. When we asked this question on the survey, I thought it was fairly interesting that there was a very, very high, important and very important response rate for recovering my missing pet and my pet's safety and well-being, and an unusually uncharacteristic response that pet licensing is not that important. So how are we supposed to get those animals back to their owners? It leaves it's a quite interesting conundrum. Without asking more detailed questions on why that is, we suspect it may be because there's a perception that licensing is difficult. And so what we've tried to do is find ways to make licensing easier. The municipal code does allow that any Larimer County license is honored by the Town of Wellington. And to that end, that has been the primary means of getting animals licensed for the Town of Wellington is through NOCO Humane, which is a Larimer County license. There are multiple ways to do that. All this information is on NOCO's website. There are links to do it online. I did it myself. It's relatively easy. You can also do it by phone or by what have you. There's an opportunity as well.
Cody, I have a question.
Yes, Trustee Teets.
With licensing procedures, do we have anything in our code that allows for a deviation if an animal, say, they require updated rabies vaccination for licensing? I have an animal that cannot have a rabies vaccination because she is allergic to the actual vaccination itself. Do we have anything written in our code that states that there is waivers that can be done for animals that can't have these vaccinations?
Thanks for the question, Trustee Teets. There's not a specific provision in the current municipal code that addresses that particular set of circumstances. I think it might be worthy of noting that if you've got a medical recommendation from your veterinarian that the rabies vaccination is not appropriate, you may still be able to license your pet with that medical exemption documented. but the licensing and the rabies vaccination might be considered two different things in the context that you're describing.
Right, but you have to have the rabies vaccination to license your animal. So, and since NoCo Humane enforces the rules that we write and the ordinance that we write, if we have something in our ordinance that states this is what this is, then there's no worry.
Right, so I understood the question to be, if there was anything currently on the code and there's not. And my suggestion would be that not having anything specific in the code, if you have a unique circumstance like that, that demonstrating to the enforcement officer or the licensing agency that you've got a medical exemption documented and can prove that, then I can't imagine why they would hold that over your head and say, no, we won't license your pet and you're further in violation. I think that's
Well,
a pretty unique circumstances that the code doesn't currently address.
Well, and this would alleviate the non-addressing it. So we wouldn't have to worry about arguing with anybody else if the town code states that there is animals that are exempt. It states they're exempt and no one has to fight or bicker or get approval or allowance from anything.
Section 6-51 of the Larimer County Municipal Code states, this is Chapter 6, Article 3. It says very clearly, the veterinarian shall report such vaccination, forwarding a copy of said vaccination certificate to the Larimer County Health Department or their designee within 30 days of administering such vaccination. In the case of a dog or cat whose health would be adversely affected as a result of a vaccination, the veterinarian shall give to the dog or cat's owner a signed and dated statement indicating as such. So I think that's covered under Larimer County Code.
So, and would we fall under that with our contract with NoCo Humane?
Yes.
Yes, because that's where our licensing falls through.
Perfect.
Thank you, Representative.
No problem.
I would, thank you. Since I'm screen sharing, I'm limited to my slides here. So real quickly, we also thought maybe the fees could be a factor in residents desiring to not pursue licensing. We recognize money is money. The license fee is $15 for pets that are spayed or neutered, $50 for pets that are intact. That's pretty consistent across northern Colorado. So we felt like that's pretty much in line with where we should be. So now I want to circle back to the off-leash parks or fetch zones topic. Move this to the end because it kind of is a different subset. We did a little bit of digging into this, and to maybe save the suspense, we think this is absolutely a policy decision that the board could pursue if that's a desire. There are some examples in the region of how this has been handled in other communities. There's different ways to go about doing it, but all of them require new rules and regulations, new policies, changes to the municipal code, and creation of spaces along with park rules and regulations for how to respond to those, enforcements, minimum security measures, and other factors. So it's certainly something that can be done. Depending on the path that the board may direct, it would involve different levels of staff requirements and resources to make them happen. So that was a consistent theme that we found, but I wanted to highlight a couple of examples that we did find. Boulder, Colorado has a pretty robust example, and I won't read this whole slide, but they very clearly outlined, we do have off-leash areas. They are encouraged to be used, but there's a pretty strict set of rules on what that means and how owners of pets are expected to behave, how their animals are expected to behave, and very strict controls on if they're off-leash, responding to voice and sight commands. To such ends, the Boulder example requires that your pet has to be licensed as a pet that can respond to sight and voice commands, and strict adherence to that, along with tags that are identifying them. You can see the bright shiny tag example that they used. And I've included a link here if you want to go. There's more information on Boulder's website if you wanted to dig into this further. It looks like it could be a really great program. But it does come with a pretty onerous task of defining the rules, regulations, and administering those policies and programs to demonstrate that the animals meet those defined requirements. And there were designated spaces with rules, regulations, park rules, and minimum requirements there that would also come with enforcement. So it's a good example, if that's a path that the board wants to go down, it would be a pretty onerous, task. I've also included some information from Berthoud. They took a similar approach, but a little more manageable approach. What they primarily did was amend the municipal code to designate specific areas or specific parks or open spaces within the town limits where off-leash play is allowed. And just a pretty strict rule on if your animal is actively involved in playing fetch, they don't need to be on a leash. As soon as you're not playing fetch, the animal needs to be leashed. So it does provide some flexibility. They do designate specific park areas where it's allowed and where it's not. So it comes with kind of signage and enforcement for if you're playing a fetch game here, everyone in the park can read that sign and know that this is an area where I can expect to find off-leash animals, and you kind of take your own risk. You know, if you want to have a picnic in that area, you might be subject to a dog running through your picnic mat. And of course, that would come with the offset of if any space designated for such purposes might limit other activities that might otherwise happen in that public park or open space. But it is a simple option that Berthoud has pursued to allow some flexibility. We did also ask questions around off-leash parks and fetch areas in the online survey. A little bit surprising, not as many people said that they would use a fetch park if it were available. There's some open-ended responses also in your packet that kind of identified what the concerns might be or why they would or wouldn't use it. And we also asked how often would you use it, and not the majority, but a little over half said we wouldn't use it, and then the ones that would use it less than once per week or 2 to 3 times per week. So a relatively low response rate for desire for such a facility, but still some desire. So I thought that was kind of interesting in terms of how many resources the board wants to put to pursuing these options if there's little demand for it and little usage of the existing dog park. So it's just kind of helps put some context to the questions too on what the desire and needs might be. So I don't want to go through the other attachments one by one, but the others were the survey results. That's the information that we've kind of dug into on these topics. I would love to field any questions. Kelly could probably answer some questions too, depending on the nature of them. And we would like to turn it over for board discussion.
Trustee Daly?
I think everything seems clear. I learned a lot at the facility visit that we did, and it kind of reinforces a lot of things that are in this presentation for policy and facilities. So I don't have any specific questions. Makes sense to me. I am curious about the off-leash program, and then or the fetch parks, and then I think from an overhead, specifically in licensing perspective, the Berthoud solution seems like it's much more manageable versus a separate licensing process and managing that. So curious about what kind of parks would be available for that, or acquisition of new parks, what costs would be associated with that, as well as maintenance from parks, the parks team. So some of my follow-up questions for that.
Pretty much the same she said. I would think we probably already have some parks in mind for the fetch park. I know the one over by, Wellville, I believe. The name of it would be a good one. I think we need to kind of look at the leash length for one thing. I mean, if it's specific, and I wouldn't think that's a critical thing at this point, because I don't think NOCO or anybody else is really going to be going after people if their dogs are under control, and I think that's the biggest concern at that point. So I think maybe the wording of it could be a little bit better at that point. But yeah, I went through the facilities over there at NOCO and do a great job. And, you know, hopefully they can work in conjunction with our people, our vets here in the neighborhood or in our area. And that we can get really a good meeting of the minds, just making sure that we have good policy and being able to turn our pets to the people without too much extent cost.
I too toured the facility and I asked a lot of questions around euthanization, and the timeline of when a pet is brought in, and all of the measures and, things that happen in order to avoid that as just the last resort. I felt really comfortable with the facility. And I also felt comfortable with their process to avoid that, and the care that was given to the animals. I do have, a concern about, or not a concern, but would like to look at that, lead length and the at-large being physically on your property. I think that's something we could talk about. I think Berthoud's Fetch Park is an interesting idea to consider if that's where we go, but reading through the survey result, I did see a lot of concern with our existing facility and the water in particular there that I would like to see about improving that park that we already have for the animals. And then I just wanted to point out, I think it's interesting that in the survey also people want more enforcement, not less. That was very consistent across the result. And then also, out of 354 days of impoundment of our pets, there was only one violation and one animal at large warning, which to me is just an example of how that too is a last resort for Nuclear Humane when they're, you know, dealing with our animals that are running around like we know they are.
I got one quick question too. We were saying there's a limit of 3 animals per
It's-
household.
It's 4 total if you have dogs and cats, or
You got
3
chickens.
dogs, or 3 cats, or 12 chickens.
You can have 12 chickens.
You can have 12 chickens,
Okay.
and
Unless
2
you live
dogs
in
and
an
2
HOA.
cats, or 3 cats, or 3 dogs. Yes.
Yeah.
sounds right.
It is, that's a piece, the combinations have been different across different communities. I've seen, just for consistency purposes, more of a 4 animal limit without regard to 3 dogs, 3 cats, like just 4 is 4 has been a more common experience in my past. But that is something we can look into if there's a desire of the board to make it easier to understand as opposed to the combinations effect.
I'm not confused by it, but that's all I have.
Trustee Teets.
Yes, so that was actually one of my biggest concerns was what trustee Moyer had brought up related to the survey responses and the existing dog park. It was surprising reading through the lack of use of that dog park because people were worried about aggressive dogs. They were worried about being able to just gain access just to the pond area and not have access simply to the fenced in areas. And I think that taking that feedback that we got in that section of the survey would be of great benefit and maybe increase people attending that area. There was concerns that there was sickness in animals that were in the ponds over there. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed probably before we go adding, the fetch parks and items like that. What I would like to know is if there is an opportunity and if we are going to look at maybe helping residents out and addressing some of those areas that we're already dealing with in that other one, is there a way to do a trial run or put up temporary fencing for a fetch park to see if it will actually be utilized? And maybe have a survey to see if people utilized a fetch park set up in a temporary area that might give time to fix or address any issues that we might have at the other dog park. But I'd like to explore the idea but this might offer a good route to say, hey, right now, we have this temporary area set up because we need to address this dog park that already exists here in town. Um, the total pets, yes, I'm gonna admit it was confusing to me is when I looked at how many animals were actually allowed compared to how many residents know we actually have an ordinance that states how many animals they are allowed to have in their home or on their property. I think that the 4 is a great idea because then it's just generalized and people don't have to go digging to figure out how many animals, how many dogs, how many cats, how many chickens. The 4 and the number of chickens left the way it is fine because they're most likely egg producers. The item, Cody, that you discussed related to 88 animals, knowing that this was brought up from a local resident who actually has 88 animals and who knows people who do, her concern was related to having whomever does retrieve that animal reach out and directly contact the said owner or work with a local vet with ADA. A lot of people who have those ADA animals don't have means of transportation and might not be able to answer their phone or items like that. So, and if there is an ADA dog that is out and about wandering, most likely there is a very specific reason that it has left its home to find help. So I don't know if that would be something we could talk with Dr. Zadina about to see if that would be an option for 88 animals. That way they're really close to home. People can walk or ride their wheelchair to pick up that ADA animal. They don't have to figure out how to get transport to another area.
I'll even bring it back to them, instead of picking
Yeah,
people.
I think, yeah, trustee Teets, I made myself a note to follow up on this, but we'll ask NOCO Humane. I heard from Dr. Zadina that he would be willing to help in those regards too. I can't imagine why NOCO Humane wouldn't be interested in helping get those animals back to someone who needed transportation. But we'll follow up on that with the parties. So thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't doubt that NOCO Humane would not be able to utilize it. It's just getting that animal back in a quick and timely manner and having someone local here who might be able to assist with that at a moment's notice might be of great benefit where you have responders. We share the humane people that we actually have assigned to the area. We don't have quite the moment's notice.
Right. And
Other than that,
agree with
I think,
Sorry, trustee Teets. I was just going to acknowledge the comment, and that is already the policy of NOCO Humane is to get animals returned to their owners quickly.
oh, right, correct. No, I'm just speaking to the ADA aspect of it and that if we can get the animal dropped off local rather than transport it to Fort Collins and Loveland and have to bring it back. I just something that might work smoothly or easily or for someone with a disability. The only other thing that I look at when you look at talking about the violations and the dogs at large and animals like that, I think that having a number and sticking to it, having a specific amount of warnings, I know it's always going to be the goal to try and get the animal back, but we need an ordinance that can be followed across the board where there's the lenience is there and this is how many warnings you get, not we're going to try and reunite you every time the animal does get out, things like that, because then what you start to hear about is oh well they're playing favorites or oh they didn't respond right to me so their dog is getting transported. Those are the kind of concerns that I'm worried about when we try to look at, oh, we grant leniency when it's due and items like that. I think that we should have a set amount of warnings and those warnings should be it. And yeah, I see it going bad if someone feels like they're being treated differently than their next door neighbor. So that's all I have for that.
Could I ask a clarifying question, trustee Teets?
Absolutely.
If you're asking to increase the level of enforcement, what would you suggest would be the appropriate number of warnings?
So that would be something that I would say we definitely talk to NOCO Humane Society about. They're gonna have better numbers on repeat offenders, how frequently those items come up. And it's not so much increase the enforcement, it's just pick a number and stick with it. So it's the consistency of the ordinance, kind of not having, like, I think you had said, it's a tool in the toolbox to be able to enforce it kind of thing. And I'm not quite sure that leniency should be there as much. You should try to reunite, yes, but how many times do we want to reunite the same owner with the same dog? So I want to just make sure that we're writing an ordinance that is level across the playing field and can't be viewed as oh, that's not fair. They're not doing this to me, but they're doing that to them.
Trustee Teets, are you looking for consistency before a ticket is issued? Or?
Yes,
is that
just,
what you're thinking? When there's a lot of discretion there, but you're also talking about reuniting animals with their owners. And I mean, for running at large,
correct.
I can't imagine a dog being impounded as punishment for running at large. The reason animals running at large get transported to NOCO Humane is because they can't find the owner. And so it's not
Right.
it's not a punishment to transport them. So there's not leniency involved. They're transported because
There's no
they
other
have no other
solution.
place to take them. NOCO Humane is not impounding animals as punishment for violation of running at large code.
No,
That's
so,
not-
and if I'm not explaining it right, I apologize. So what I am pretty much saying is how many calls to owners before they transport should be allowed. So if they say, oh, well, this specific owner, we're gonna call every time we
Okay,
find their
so how
dog, we're
many-
gonna call.
How many
The
times-
owner before transporting,
Yes, that's what I'm asking. Do we,
On
cause
call or multiple occasions?
yes, that's what I'm asking, is do we call the owner every single time? Or after how many times is this animal just straight up getting transported?
Oh.
Yeah, so I think it's what I've heard from the NOCO officers is it can be completely contextual. If their goal is always gonna be to reunite, we can talk about how many times they call. But what we've heard from them repeatedly is because they've got other service areas, other needs, other calls that come in, it can depend on what they're being called to do. If they have to respond to an emergency, and go and deal with that, they may not have time to make 3 phone calls, but
Mhm.
they have never indicated to us that they won't make an attempt. So I think it just can be contextual based on the demands at the time that the animal is picked up in custody.
Yeah, I think the gray area in this is beneficial.
Got it.
Trustee Bailey?
I do want to acknowledge that during the presentation, there was a recommendation to potentially put a temporary dog park on the east side for people who live in family type buildings and don't have yards. So that's been something that's actually already been recommended, that it sounds like a great idea. Not to mention, I've heard outcry from the east side for just a actual dog park, not veg park.
Down by the old baseball field? or
Yeah.
softball field?
Yeah, in that retention area.
Yeah.
So I do want to acknowledge that that's been something that's kind of been recommended, and they might be seeking some support in the future.
Okay. Cool. Trustee Kim?
First of all, sorry for being late. I was tied up at the conference there. I did try to go online and seemed like I couldn't connect very well there. And I apologize for missing most of this discussion, because I appreciate all the work that the staff has done to do this research and put together these presentations and these recommendations. From the little bit that I've gained and heard, we do have the one dog park at the north end of town. I've taken my dogs there one time and I will never take them back again because they were attacked by, I would call them vicious dogs.
Another dog.
By another dog at that park. There's questions about that pond out there. They treat that pond to keep the algae down so that they can use that to irrigate Buffalo Creek. So the chemicals in there are harmful for the dogs. It's not a good situation. And I just refuse to take my dogs there. We do need another dog park on the east side of town. I think the ball field over there, Barry, by the ponds would be a great addition. Something in there. I love the idea of the fetch park. I think we should try it and let's go with it. People would appreciate that, a little bit more freedom for the dogs. I said this before the election that when they were first debating the NOCO humane contract, that why don't we give them a shot? You know, let's give it a year. Let's take a look at how they respond, how they, you know, how they handle the dog situation. I mean, I'm on Facebook every day, and there's 2 or 3 dogs loose every single day in Wellington. I'd rather have one solution than 4 or 5 different solutions, and who do I call, and how do we contact people? Like every other trustee, I've visited NOCO Humane. I'm very impressed with their facility, impressed with their staff. I'm impressed with their professionalism. I think they would do a great service for the town. That's my general thoughts. And again, I apologize for missing part of this meeting because I'm sure there's aspects of what's been presented that I can't touch on because I just simply didn't hear that. Now, be part of that discussion there. But I would tend to be more in favor of just one solution. You know, the one solution being, okay, who do you call? Local humane. Okay. It's easier on staff. It's easier on I think the residents as well. And I am compassionate about, you know, people being relocated with their dogs. Today, for example, I saw someone had posted that their dog got loose, and within 50 minutes, someone had posted another thing pretty close to that area with the same picture of the same dog saying, hey, I just spotted these dogs here. I like the way that works, you know, and people can get a chance to maybe narrow down where their dogs is, because NOCO Humane can't be everywhere. And I appreciate the humanity that this community has toward pets. Warnings. One morning, you know, look, we're not going to give you a fine, but you need to take care of your dog. That's the responsibility of all dogs. My dogs have gotten loose one time, scared the stew out of all of us, you know, but luckily we found them quickly. But we got in the car, we went in the neighborhood and we found them 2 blocks away. And every time the wind blows, I'm out there checking my fences to make sure nothing is blown down and my dogs can't get out again. So that's the responsibility of a dog owner. So I don't want to sound callous because I do care about the dogs. I care about people's attachment to their pets because they're family members. But again, I think I would rather see NOCO Humane have a little bit more than 2 months worth of, you know, time with the town handling our complaints to get in a better picture of, okay, are they meeting the needs of the community? You know, I don't agree that that's a kill shelter as it's been characterized. I just don't agree with that. And I think that's misleading to the public to frame it that way. But that's my thoughts on animal control.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Well, just a couple of quick things here. I think, as far as leash lengths go, I think it would be really easy for us to just say, hey, fixed leashes up to, 6 or 8 feet, whatever. Yeah, I think it's 6 feet currently. Something like fixed leashes up to 6 to 8 feet, and then retractable leashes up to 28 feet or whatever the average retractable leash length is. I think that'd be a real simple change for us to make, and it would cover retractable leashes. as far as pet parks go, I do support that. I think it would be a good thing, at least for us to give it a try. I don't like boulders. I approach with the voice and sight tags. I think that would be far too much administrative burden for staff. So I do like Berthoud's example there. There was some discussion about total number of animals in the home. Unfortunately, I think this is kind of an arbitrary number because it's not really got to do with who is a good pet owner and how many dogs you have in the house. What it has more to do with is in the event that, oh, I don't know, somebody might happen to be a hoarder or something like that, and it has 50 cats or something like this, where it becomes not only a public health and safety issue, but also something where it's in Cody's words, a tool in the toolbox for enforcement and these types of things. So while it may be an arbitrary number, I don't know that we should go messing around with that too much. I think everybody could argue about what that number should be or for what reason. But again, it's really meant to be a tool in the toolbox for enforcement in the event of those public health and safety issues. So I did speak with Ms. Calhoun regarding the potential for NOCO Humane to drop off animals at some PACFA licensed facility. And she said that NOCO Humane would be amenable to that, assuming that would be something that the board would be interested in. I think there's definitely some logistical details we need to work out there, and I've had some discussion with our friends here about what that would look like, hours of operation, where these things would be posted. NOCO Humane does a great job of updating their website every 15 minutes or so for pets that are lost and these types of things. But if the board wanted to pursue a direction that was having an alternate local drop-off location, assuming we could get the logistics in line and it wouldn't be too much of an administrative burden, I think that might be something worth looking at. Other than that, I think that's all I've got.
Okay. I agree with the leash. Something, because the retractables have changed, things of that nature. Just don't want to get too out of hand with it, right? So we could have a coon dog on a long lead and call it a leash, right? So let's be realistic with it, but I think it's fair to say, retractable leashes, something of that nature for under control. Animals, number of animals, I think I don't know, so that's something we should really address, just in the sense that it's not something that is really enforced unless there's an actual need to enforce it. It's not like we're hunting down people that have more than 4 animals, So I don't know, though, that's something that really needs to be done, if the board does want to do that, I would be agreeable with just saying 4 is 4. At large in the front yard, I don't know. I find it difficult to say the dog's at large if it's on the front yard, and I feel that NOCO Humane would do the same thing. So I don't know, so that needs to be addressed, but I think, doing something on social media, posting awareness of an underground fence or something like that would be helpful just for public knowledge. What else do we have here? Warnings. I say that the gray area is good with warnings because it is case by case. You never know. Obviously, there's a repeat offender. I think they would know that in their system. They would handle it accordingly. That's their job, kind of like the police. They gave me warnings for speeding on the interstate, but if I'm speeding and then I rear end somebody, yeah, I should probably get a ticket. So I think we should play that the way that it is, kind of leave it gray, let them do the enforcement there. That's my thoughts. But now we can open it up to Dr. Zadina, and you guys, you want to come over here and present your piece or like this? Get some chairs for you.
We don't really have a presentation, which is just more
More
comments.
discussion?
Yeah, more discussion.
Okay.
Hey, why don't you scoot this way?
Comment on.
Come with maybe else, or integrated solution versus one and only, so thanks for the time again, guys.
A quick comment on vicious dogs, so the vicious dog doesn't have to be at large, a vicious dog can be on a leash, a vicious dog can be in a dog park. So I wanna make sure everybody's aware, if you see a vicious dog, you should report a vicious dog. regardless of area. So I just wanna make sure it's super clear.
Rebecca doesn't mind it. It's not hard.
I smell that too.
I think what I'd like to do is to kind of give an update to those who were not present in the conversations that we've had with the town, just so everyone's kind of on the same page. So basically what we are proposing is in no way a replacement for NoCo Humane. This is a service to be added on. So it is not like Dr. Zadina is saying, oh, we want to take over NoCo's contract. That's not what is happening here. I'm sorry?
I'm busy enough.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of things that were mentioned when it comes to animal count and dogs in the front yard and things like that. The kind of analogy that we'd like to present is with like how police officers view the seatbelt law. It's always in conjunction with something else. It's not like, you know, anytime they see someone without a seatbelt, you know, you guys are aware of that whole thing. It's usually if they're speeding and there's a seatbelt, there's a rash, you know, so if that could be something that could be kept in the back of our minds when it comes to animal counts and things like that, because one thing I do worry about with animal counts is people deciding not to get their pets vaccinated because that information goes to a government agency, and then all of a sudden they know how many pets they have in their house, and then they're going to come and take the pets, because that is always an extension of people's thought pattern when it comes to government or, yeah, yeah, so that's just something that it might want to keep in the back of our heads. When it comes to the phone call, you know, the who do people call? We know that with the presentation that Mr. Bird gave us was that it's not like we're talking about hundreds of animals a month. And they said 71 calls in a quarter. So the way I would see things happening is, and also it was stated that 8 hours a day, 5 days a week is our contract with NoCo Humane. So for the hours that do overlay with Tabby Road, you know, those would be hours that we would be able to have the pets kept in Wellington. So if it was that one phone number, it's very easy. If there are pets being held at Tabby Road, then, you know, me or one of the team volunteers would answer the phone and, you know, say, hey, you know, we've got this pet and we can help you find out if it's yours or not. Otherwise, the number would just be forwarded to NoCo Humane because they would call the number. Tabby Road doesn't have any, so it just goes straight to NoCo Humane. It's, you know, that it's. Well, and it's just like it would be one number, and either it would come to us and then we would help the people find out if the one at Tabby Road is there. If that's not theirs, then we can get on the website with them and go through the ones that are at NoCo and try to help them, you know, get reunited. So that's really not a big deal. The one thing that we can do better than NoCo can do is marketing through Facebook, through Nextdoor, through multiple Facebook pages. We can do one post and then disperse it to multiple pages and groups so that we get that word out to as many people as possible quickly, like within minutes of that dog or cat or bunny or whatever being there. We can disperse that information to a lot more people than just being posted on one website. And of course, we would also have the website. And we had spoken before about tracking, you know, that the town would want tracking information about what's happening in our possession. And so we would have a live dashboard available, you know, that the town could log into, or that we could actually give you an iframe to actually put on your website. So that anybody who needs the access to the information would have access to the information about length, you know, average length of time, number of pets, you know, anything that's related to any of the pets that go in there. And so hopefully that kind of gets everyone on the same page. This is in no way to do anything with the contract that is already existing. This is just a benefit to the residents to be able to get dogs back faster, like, you know,
Supplement.
yeah, a supplement, and there've been many instances where within 5 minutes of a animal being turned over to Tabby Road, somebody's already on the way, and that would usually.
During the last meeting we had.
Yeah.
10 minutes. but-
Yeah.
So,
And for the, for the repeat offenders, and also the town is already used to dropping animals at either Wellington, that, and there was also a discussion with the different vets in town, that if somebody brings an animal to their location, they would ask them to bring it to Tabby Road instead, so that there's not all these vets all over with all these animals.
Yeah.
It's just Tabby Road. So
Yeah.
hopefully that, sets a good foundation for the discussion.
thanks, Cody.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry, in the past, if my passions come over as anger, it's not, it's just, I'm passionate about it. So I'm gonna ask you guys first, after I present, what we're gonna want to offer you guys for the town is a dedication to work with us after we go through the process of getting licensing, because that costs money. So, you know, if something you guys aren't gonna do, tell me, I won't get licensed, but we'll start with what we're gonna offer. So I think Don kind of hit on it. We're gonna streamline the process basically. So we're there Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, Saturdays, 8 till noon. So there's pets dropped off, we're there most of the time. We also have emergency hours, so people need to call and say, hey, is my pet at your place? I just took an emergency call just a little bit ago, so it's easy peasy. They call me and it's already existing framework. You know, we're not trying to take the place of NOCO, like she said, we're not trying to do that, we're just trying to make it easier. And some of this is based on my experiences, which we'll go over in a second, but I'm speaking from a realist perspective, or you guys are speaking from an idealist perspective. So you know, boots on the ground, have seen what happens, and you guys have been to a clean facility under military inspection that's on their best behavior for you, the colonel, to be there to look it over. So, you know, I think there's a little bit of gray area there. So, you know, first, you know, the humanity thing statement that Ed was talking about, I think it is our job as a community to make the best option for everyone, which includes, I think it's an integrative approach, because we can't all be one thing for everyone. So for me, it's not a business decision. I don't make any money. It's actually a pain in the rear, but we're gonna do it because we want to do it and want to help animals. So that's why I'm doing it. You comment for the kill shelter. It is a kill shelter. Using a realist example, you guys probably heard of Chance, the dog that hit the interstate recently. So this is an example of things that fall through the cracks and things we can catch easier if we have this approach we're doing. So Chance was hit 925 in Wellington. He was brought by a Good Samaritan to CSU. CSU stabilized him, took him to NOCO Humane. We started asking where he's at because he's a community dog. And Miss Calhoun, maybe he's worked with 3 guys, and she's gonna be the point person now, but I called her and started asking where it was, and she says, well, I can't tell you that, can't tell you that. 5 days went by, you know, that's a holding period. I said, what are you gonna do with this dog? She wouldn't answer me, and so finally I said, look, I'm coming down there to find the dog if you're not gonna talk to me. So finally she said, hey, would you like the dog? And anyway, we got the dog, fixed it up, got his pelvis repaired, raised money for the community, which was awesome, and he's a good, happy dog. I was gonna bring him tonight, but he's at home now with his new owner and hanging out, so I don't want to stress him out too much, but those are the things we want to do. I mean, the only person who made money on that was CSU, like $9,000, but whatever, they still fixed the dog and he's happy now, so that's what matters, you know, and those things we can catch more if we have a system where we're more involved in the process, you know, because on his paperwork, it said they were gonna euthanize him after the 5-day process. There's no arguing that. He was on the paperwork, gonna be killed, so we saved him, so that's good. As far as anything else, you know, Chance, now Cody kept hitting on this several times. It's always their first duty to return the dog initially. And this is based on my experience. So, and it was the same director when this happened to me. So, you know, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. So, you know, when I had my dogs live north of town, it was a Sunday night or Sunday afternoon. They took off chasing a rabbit, not hurting anything. A neighbor that didn't know us at the time called NOCO, Lerner Humane at the time. Started blizzarding, they picked him up, and I looked for him until midnight. Kid was crying, I was upset, thought the dogs were dead. They're microchipped and have tags, so they're identified. We get a call the next day at noon, your dogs are at the shelter, come get them, and so came and got them. Poor little dogs are terrified. First of all, I thought they're in trouble. Two were, no, they weren't. And then two, with the, they always try to give you warnings. There was no warning. They got 2 citations to be put in court plus impound fee. So there was a large cost involved, not only time, but in money. And I asked them, why didn't you, return the dogs in the field? Well, that's not our job. We take them, impound them and take them back because they were identified. So no question there. So anyway, so that was my experience. So maybe it doesn't happen to everybody, but that's what happened to me.
Also, just to prove your point,
Yes,
if they were able to call you the next day, they could have called you that night.
exactly. So, thank you. I will also say that I've been talking to the DA in Larimer County regarding their interactions with them, just trying to do full research. And the investigator I spoke with said they have problems with them as well because, they're as you guys know, they're a nonprofit corporation, so they don't answer to anybody except for their board. And so the DA said they write a lot of times inappropriate citations. District attorneys tried to train them and they won't listen to them either. So, some things we just need to keep in check with them. I'm not saying they're all bad, but some things we need to think about. We can't just turn it all over to them and let them run free because it doesn't always work out well for everyone, so, and moving on, I think together is the key, form a solution that works with them and us. And I've also talked to every other vet in town. They're all on board to help as well. So they all have kind of my opinion that we need to do a better job of serving the animal community versus just shipping them off to NOCO. Than that, the PAC for license, so that seems to be a question mark. So I talked to our PAC inspector who were already PAC certified for a kennel, so not too much of an issue to get a separate license. I think it'll cost about $2,000. We already talked about that. We'll raise the money and take care of it. But it's really an easy process. I could have it done in a month, so it's not a hard thing. So facility design and stuff, it's not that big of a deal. Our inspector says basically different air supply, area away from the other animals so that we're not transferring disease, separate sink, and that's it. So, and we've already got that. We just have to put a fan in for an air exchanger and we'll be good. So as long as I have your commitment, I will do it and move forward and offer the town another option.
But you also had things that you wanted to address when it came to the ordinances.
And that, I think that's the similar as we're talking about tonight. So leash laws and such, we have a whole separate discussion on that. I don't know if it's appropriate for tonight, because we have a lot of things to discuss. I think we should go back and have a separate session on that at some point, because we've all been working on a pretty extensive list on recommended changes. I think some of it, vagueness is not always a good thing either, and I think maybe more precise. And then also just rights of citizens, the way it sits now, they can have a person that's employed by a corporation trespassing their property, coming to your pet without a police officer with them. And it's that, to me, they at least have an officer with them and a warrant, the sheriff has to have a warrant to come to property, why shouldn't they, just things like that. We can discuss that at a later date. We have a pretty good list already going, so I think Patty's got a copy of that too, don't you, Patty?
Your list?
Well, this is our working group list of the ordinances.
It's that shared document.
Oh, yes.
And to close with my comments, mainly what I would like to see is, they're required to, kind of requirement like a SOP, standard operating procedure for them. There's not really a contract now, from what I understand, there's an agreement. Doesn't outline what they do. So if we have a simple, say, hey, during these business hours, you guys are required to at least stop by the clinic, see if they belong to anybody, and then you can decide at that point to drop them off, and we can take them or not, at that point. And basically make them have to do that as part of their contract. That's all I really want, and one more example that I'll also shut up was, we had Sheriff Nancy found 3 dogs at the high school several weeks ago. She first called the shelter and then she's like, wait, why don't you just call Heavy Road? So she got 3 dogs down. Shelter's on the way and said, well, can't you hold them for 10 more minutes? We'll come get them. So once again, not returning phone owner. And so Nancy said, well, no, we got to take care of. So owner came and got them. All's good. So, it's things like that work out all the time, most of the time. So. Big deal.
Did you have something to say?
I just had a couple of things. First thing, I was wondering if they contact each one of the local vets to see whether or not the dog, if you pick up a dog or something, whether they can help identify them. It would probably expedite the whole process if that happened. Right now, if they pick them up, they make one phone call or go. At least would leave it in the hands of the people here. Number one. Number two, dogs, we all have them that get a little anxious after a while. I just think that might help facilitate some things. And I think the next thing, and it will
piggyback on what we're talking about now is what type of agreement would have to be put together to do this?
Yes, because we want to make sure that we give you exactly what you want and it doesn't, so that it's. And actually, Mr. Byrd had given us some suggestions on that as well. But we want to make sure that what we give you is an acceptable format, and maybe it would be Mr. Sapienza who would have an example template or something, so that we meet your requirements.
And that were used, because I used to do it, not used.
Off the top of my head, I feel like I need to talk to NOCO Humane. We do have a contract for services with NOCO Humane, and really what's being asked here is for the town to require them to perform additional duties, to do something different than they're doing right now. So really, this is something that if the town's gonna require, we're gonna need to talk to NOCO Humane. And I would think probably there need to be some sort of contract between Tabby Road and NOCO Humane as well, just in terms of transferring animals. So I think, there's a lot of contracts that I would want written about this. And the first thing I would do is I want to talk to NOCO Humane about their willingness to modify that.
And also, just a little comment, so just kind of think of it too, as it's a business relationship. We're the consumer, we tell them what to do. It's like they're coming to us for money, so.
Well, we're in a contract with them.
Right.
For service.
Right.
We've signed a contract, and so
Well,
we
now
need to talk to them.
reviews every year.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm saying we need to talk to them before we can say that what can or cannot be.
But also in the ordinance, it specifies that the town can, it was towards the top, if I remember, I should have brought a copy, but it specified that the town can specify where the animals are dropped off.
I just wanted,
Yeah, oh no,
before I say that, what contract,
lawyer.
or what needs to be done, I
Right.
need to talk to.
no, I understand.
Sure.
I just wanted to make sure that you knew that it was in the ordinance, that the town can state that, so.
So, just, yeah.
Yeah.
Before I can tell you what we need, or
Mhm.
what contracts might be needed, or what documents might need to be signed, step one is I want to talk to our service provider,
Yes,
so.
Can we get a copy of the agreement that is signed between?
It's in.
yeah, it's in the packet.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
I think it's the March date.
So I guess board direction at this point, we can't make decisions, but direction.
Yeah, I guess the real question is, obviously this is somewhat of a monetary burden for Dr. Zadina, right? He's got to go out and get this licensed. I suppose the question is the board, is this something the board wants to pursue in terms of an alternate drop-off location? And so I suppose we should probably all go around, and I suppose I would not be opposed to an alternate drop-off location. My only concerns from my perspective are, I don't want residents to get confused in terms of what number they need to call and when, right? It needs to be something that is very explicitly, here's who you call. If your animal's not at Tabby Road, then it rings through to NOCO Humane or whatever it happens to be, but minimizing confusion, I think, is key here. I'm not opposed to having a local drop-off location, though, assuming we can get all the logistics nailed down.
Brian, on that point too, I will say, just from our experience being here for almost 11 years, people always call us too, and they call other clinics. It's just kind of, people just do it, but we could have a more delineated system too, but it's always kind of just, they always call it, because it's not always at no community, even if they have this exclusive contract, it's not always there, so they're gonna call the places, so.
Chris Kim,
Well, my mind's not made up. I just want to say that, I did express my opinion because I like Trustee Mason. I don't want to confuse the residents. I also don't want to confuse staff with if they should get a call about, okay, do I call route them here, do I route them there, and so forth. And there should not be some kind of decision matrix that they have to go through to do that. I'm also opposed to adding more financial burden to the town for animal control. I mean, we've got the contract right now that it's going to cost us X amount of money per year. And I would not want to see another separate contract on top of that. Now we're paying more for.
There is no cost. Okay.
Let me finish, please.
Okay.
I'm just stating my opinion. I would not want to see an extra burden to the taxpayers for that. But whatever the board collectively decides, I'm 100% behind.
Thank you.
It's very simple of you.
You vote one way and it's over with, okay? That's policy now. Let's move on.
First one.
Yeah, I mean, I have similar sentiments. I absolutely 100% appreciate you all getting together and trying to find a solution to a problem that you see. I also do not want to see an added burden to the town, which when I hear multiple contracts being written by lawyers, sorry, Dan, that sounds expensive. I think what we're talking about is something that's already happening, right? The town is already participating in this solution with you. And so really what we're talking about is formalizing it and basically giving Tabby Road first right of refusal to the animal before it goes to Fort Collins.
And giving guidance.
Yeah, so that being said, I think there probably is a solution here that could be reached pretty quickly, and I would love to see that happen because I feel like we've spent a lot of time talking about this issue. And I think that we have the solution, we just need to figure out. Right. Sorry, I had one more thought. Oh, the other thing that I did wonder about is capacity. So for your facility, right, you don't have the space to house 300 animals.
It wouldn't, yeah. wouldn't.
Right, it wouldn't be that many, obviously, the data shows us differently, but capacity for you, your staff, the town, our staff. I just think we need to be really careful when we do put something together that's at the front of, our minds.
That would be right too. If we're full and say, no, go take it yourself, because you're already under contract, so you're getting paid, so take it, you're good. It's the right, like right of first refusal, so, and plus, most of those dogs go home in 10 minutes, so it's not, really, honestly.
I can understand that like on a July 4th,
Yeah.
how things could get crazy, but but it is, we already do have a no-co relationship, so if Tabby Road was full, then the overflow would go to no-co.
Oh, and I'm sorry. There's one more thing. So I think we need to be really careful when we're talking about things that we're passionate about, because I know your heart and I know you care, but we're also trying to be really good partners. And we're gonna continue to grow and we're gonna continue to bring in partners that not everybody is comfortable with. And I would not want for a second to offend or make it seem like we as a town are ungrateful for the services that are being provided, because I think that we are grateful and you can see it in the survey results that people want this type of service. So I just want to say that, and know that I know where you're coming from.
And
I
he's not allowed
appreciate you.
to talk.
Yeah, no more.
Keep my no, that's okay, dog's my check, it's okay.
Yeah.
I need something like that. I'm controlled by a bunch of women, basically.
Before I call them first meeting, what would be your potential capacity?
So it depends. Right now, I mean, we could, in the isolation area, we could put like 7 pets probably, but it's not, I don't know if we're called to have that huge of a thing, but also if they're client pets, when they're vaccinated, they can go into boarding. So we've got more places back there too. So the places we're looking at that are isolation animals we don't know about. So,
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Trustee Wiegand?
I kind of like what you guys have brought to us here, you're not looking at replacing. NOCO, I mean, they got a fantastic organization down there. This is in addition to them, and it's pretty much a service to the community, large. And it's a good starting point. And, we're gonna have volunteers down there, I presume, or you paid staff.
No,
It's gonna be.
I assume people paying my clinic and they're down there doing it, so not
Right,
volunteers.
so I mean.
Should be
you got-
volunteering. Should be
I'll have-
volunteering.
I'll have a group.
Right, so I mean, they're gonna have people there that, it's not gonna add any cost to the town, I would not think.
Other than the contracts.
And as far as the contract, I think that should be minimal, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know.
I mean, I've paid Dan for a contract and it is not cheap. Not personally.
But haven't even looked into this one.
I got it.
Like I
I got
said,
it.
step one is I want to talk to.
But we already have a contract out there. Would we have to have something in
We
it?
need a contract with Tabby Road to cover provision of phone services, indemnification, insurance provisions. I mean, I can, off the top of my head, I can think of a lot of provisions I want in that contract.
Mhm.
And NoCo Humane may also want a contract with Tabby Road if they are the ones dropping the animals off,
Mhm.
just for their own liability protection. I could see it being a three-way contract and a lot of lawyers involved, potentially, but like I
I
said.
got a
haven't even
volunteer
talked
that'll
to
do it
NoCo
for
Humane.
us. I got a volunteer that'll do it for us.
His
My
wife. His lawyer.
There'll be four lawyers involved.
Right.
I'll volunteer that, they.
So,
You know, I do love seeing the collaboration between the private sector, NOCO and the city. I think that's great that we're working together, trying to form a solution that's gonna be applicable to the whole town. So appreciate what you guys do.
And I would like to also mention that, which has been brought up several times, is which Dr. Zadina had mentioned, is that it's true, when somebody does lose their pet, they are calling all the different vets. In addition to NOCO.
Already.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so with the vets being, agreeing to refer all calls to Tabby, that will at least,
Right.
get part of that taken care of.
Thank you. Trustee Teets?
Yes. So I want to say that I was actually another trustee that had a chance to tour NOCO Humane Society, and it is an amazing facility. The availability and space they have there, the dog runs, the dog park, all of those items. With that being said, I would have no qualm or issue exploring private sector discussions with not only Dr. Zadina, but also looking at what that partnership looks like with our vets here local in town. And how I see that is if there is a contract that needs to be drafted up between NOCO and Dr. Zadina, that's going to be on NOCO and Dr. Zadina. I think when it comes down to us, the indemnification and release of liability, it shouldn't be super difficult and time consuming. I've seen this entity raise $10,000 for a dog that was hit on I-25. I am positive that they can figure out how to raise money to help cover attorney's fees, if that's something that we need to look at and address. I loved the fact that they came to the table with questions of what do we do next? And I think that there's been over the many months, lots of conversations revolving these kind of items, but I feel it's not been defined on what the expectations were, on what kind of contract they should bring back, what are they doing or looking at as far as what do they need to secure. So if we gave them a guided list of items needing to be accomplished in order to move forward looking at a private partnership, I think that that would greatly benefit them, but I also feel that it would benefit our residents here in town. I like the fact that if we do have a call, I think all calls should still go through NOCO Humane, and NOCO Humane can contact Tabby Road. That's a contract that would be through them. If Chad could hold a dog for a few hours until a resident is off work, great. If Chad refers that dog out and says, I have no room and it needs to go to Fort Collins, that sounds fine as well. Bless you. I think the conversation can happen. I have nothing against it. Moving forward, I would like to know if there's any legalities that the town of Wellington is facing, if we are looking at a contract or looking at discussions to further it. I guess my question to Dr. Zadina is, have you received an actual list of what would be required from you guys to enter into some kind of partnership?
We have not, no.
Okay. Have you seen any kind of guidance where there's a list of items that would be required for you, Dr. Dezina, to have those dogs in your facility? Have you found out generalized information? Got it. I think I would need to have more information on both sides. So if Dr. Zedina is able to accomplish the items that would be required of him to house and do or receive animals from NOCO Humane, I think that would be on them to figure out and discover those details and bring those details back to us on what the requirements are and if they can accomplish them. And on our side of things, knowing if we can enter into this kind of agreement and contract with the contract we're in right now with NOCO Humane.
Trustee Teets, we have, everything when it comes to the licensing, which is what you would be interested in. And we are just waiting for guidance from the board as to whether we should pursue the licensing. And so we would just need that state license, which Mr. Bird also talked about. And that's like the, the golden ticket. It's just that says we can be a shelter. So with direction from the board, when that decision is made, then it would be a very short period of time before that license would be issued.
Got it. Then I'm not against discovering what partnerships would look like with local entities.
Thank you. Trustee Daly?
I have a lot of questions of whether or not this is like a legislative matter or at all. So if you were gonna think, if my behavior is, the only time I would ever call NOCO Humane is if I thought someone was at risk of a safety concern, or I found an animal that I didn't think I could handle, right, for my safety. It'd all be safety related. So, and then my first call would be Chad, because Chad, the vet I know, who I once, not speed dial, but I have his phone number, So that would be my activity and my action. And then his instruction would be bring the dog by, let me scan it if he's available, right?
Yes.
And if that wasn't the case, I'd still continue to hold the dog until I personally found that owner. If I couldn't, and there was no other option, I would call NOCO, right? So I don't think that my process is different than the majority of people. So I don't think we need to legislate what people do, right? That's what people are gonna do. So I don't think that's a problem. We've already had a possible solution, and that is when you license your dog, which is requirement by the ordinance and county, you determine with your discretion as the owner of who is the contacts for your dog. And if I say I'm the main contact, but I put a secondary phone number, which is my vet's phone number, then and what is the current process already existing within the contract is that NOCO will contact people according to the licensing to try to find the ownership of that dog and then to return them. In which case, if they're calling Chad's available, he answers and they say, I have this dog, your information's on the licensing. Can I bring this dog to you? He says, yes, no, maybe so. There's his right of refusal right there. Done. This is all within the same process and existing everything that is already existing. I don't think we need to legislate any further than that. I feel like all the processes are in place. People have common courtesy and knowledge of what to do in the case of when they find an animal and whether or not they're at risk or not, or the situation. If a dog looks sick, I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to call somebody. So, I think that we are bringing awareness that our community wants to take care of itself. I take care of animals in my neighborhood as I expect my neighbors to do for my animals. People actually just return my dogs before and have tossed the little one over the small fence, just to return it knowing where it lives. And I have tags that say so. So it's very easy to return a very friendly dog to where it needs to be. Close the gate if necessary. So I just really question whether or not this is a legislative matter. I think this is just neighbors taking care of neighbors and people who, if they were to find a dog, to make the judgment call whether or not they're safe or not, or what needs to happen, in which case who would follow existing processes, and then owners have the discretion of who picks up the dog. So I think it exists.
The difference is if NOCO does pick up a dog, you can get it dropped here, even if it's not on the call list, that's the
Yeah.
only difference.
And I think making that choice for an owner is also out of hand. I think that is the discretion of an owner. So I think that's where they own that control, and then licensing is already required by ordinance. I think we should leave it at the hands of the owner personally. So I mean, I have a lot of feelings. I know that there's exceptions to that, but given how many at-large calls have happened versus how many strays are actually taken in, I can guarantee you this is already happening as I just said.
My mind keeps going that way, these two things, so.
Appreciate.
Sure.
On that point, so one, I think maybe it's being overthought too by attorneys in the room about the contracts.
We do.
Because that's what you do. I know. But, and I say this because it's like several years ago, the contract was with Wellington, that when I first came to town, you guys weren't even here yet. And they just basically had to be a kennel, and that was requirements of town, use them as a drop point. So I think maybe we're over complicating things, but that's your job, so that's okay. Second on that, like you said, it's already been done, so if you guys don't agree to it, I'm just gonna go rogue and do it anyway, so you might as well just work together, because we'll still be us and still do our thing, so. Yeah, it's just mainly making NOCO humane, maybe just conform to a little bit of rules to say, drop them off these time hours, that's all, and make it easy for residents, that's all we're doing, so. We're not changing anything else. That's all I got.
Yeah, and there's no requirement by this contract that anybody behaves in a certain way when they're coming across a dog. So people can choose to do whatever they want. There's no, now you have to follow the curfew. So, I mean, I'll continue doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't consider it rogue. I just consider taking care of my neighborhood, so.
Exactly. That's what I do.
But yeah, I think we already have everything in place. I think the understanding is there of what's available, and how people are gonna act is how they're gonna act. So how dogs are gonna act is how they're gonna act. So I think we're good, but I think it's very admirable that you want to offer this service. And I think that's a great thing to maybe communicate with your clients to say, I would recommend you do this based on the contract that the town has. That way, you know, if something were to happen, I would be here to take your dog. And if I were your customer, I would say, I love you even more, Chad, because of that. And it would make me more loyal to you. So I that would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I mean, I'll pair exactly what Trustee Daly said, that's where my stance is on this. So board wise, what direction do you want to give? Do we want to pursue looking at the contract, making this something legislative, or where are we at on it?
Well, it sounds as though it's gonna happen anyway, regardless of whether there's some kind of formal agreement. Chad's been doing this for, excuse me, doctors of the.
You're fine,
Been doing this for a
sir.
long time. Really call you Chad,
Sir. That's okay.
but, I think exploring, you know, what that contract needs to look like between NOCO Humane and see if there's any obligations the town has with that contract with NOCO Humane. If that's all it takes is just an agreement that he gets that first option to drop it off, it's an easy fix. Everyone's happy, and we move on. We don't have to write new codes, new ordinances and so forth like that. It's just.
It very well be maybe a simple fix, but step one is gotta talk to all the parties and see what that looks like. So. But if you'd like me to move in that direction, that's the direction I need to move.
So all in favor of exploring it?
I,
I absolutely, I think Trustee Daly brought up some excellent points in that regard, and I had not really considered it from that perspective. But I think for me, I would suggest we have Dan reach out, have a chat with NOCO Humane, see what they'd be willing to do. If it's something we can do pretty easy, I agree with Trustee Cannon, that's, you know, maybe it's not complicated. If it ends up being a giant big old, oh gosh, all kinds of things need to happen, maybe then we talk about potentially other options, but I think that's what I would recommend.
I can make a phone call. We can start this conversation.
Perfect.
Thank you all.
Do
very
they
much.
already ask for that information when you license a dog online? Is that like part of the licensing process?
I haven't
Well-
liked a dog in 14 years. I have no idea. Well, my.
You're not still getting out there.
Where the vaccination.
I think, I think the problem is it's not necessarily on the tab, right? So that's the reason.
And we don't know if we have a microchip reader in their car. I'm guessing they
They do.
Oh,
They do.
Thank you.
So, guys, your direction. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks, guys, appreciate the time.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
I have hot dogs.
That was the first topic. That was the first topic.
Maybe.
Trustee Teets, you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, this next presentation will be from Ethan Muhs on the election.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Board. I'm Ethan Muhs, your town clerk. Excited to be with you this evening to give you an overview presentation of the election program. You'll have to pardon me, my computer's being a little slow this evening. This is an agenda of what we're going to go through. First, we'll talk about the 2024 regular election, and then we'll talk through comparisons of local and coordinated elections, as well as consider some options for the regular election program moving forward. First, to start the 2024 regular election report. So this is the ultimate outcome of the town's 2024 regular election report. We received 1,989 ballots. We counted 1,788 ballots. Reasons that ballots would not have been counted include there was a signature discrepancy that wasn't resolved. There was a challenge, other issues similar to that. The initial count of votes was completed on the 12th of April. The margin of votes cast between the last elected and the first unelected candidate was greater than 0.5% in accordance with the municipal election code in the Colorado Revised Statutes. This condition would not trigger a recount. However, the second condition that permits a recount under the municipal election code is when a candidate that is involved in an election makes a request for a recount. So one of the candidates did make this request, and we completed the recount on the 14th then of April. The changes to the vote total, there were changes to the vote totals from the recount, less than 1% per candidate, but there were no overall results, no overall changes to the results of the election. The top three candidates elected were now Trustees Daly, Moyer, and Cannon, who have all since been seated. And then the results of the election have been filed with the Department of Local Affairs for Colorado in May and subsequently accepted the next day. We did receive some feedback from election judges, watchers, and candidates. I would say overwhelmingly the election judges provided positive feedback. And I would just highlight that, the election judges were members of Larimer County's election judge staff who are members of the community that are trained to participate in the county's election process. Election judges are appointed members of the town's staff, if you will, during the election period. They're appointed by me to conduct their jobs. None of the election judges had participated the ones that were appointed for this election had participated in a local or municipal election, with the exception of one. And of those, I believe only Miss Jan Barnett was the only one who had ever participated in a manually counted ballot election before. So it was though they had been trained previously, it was sort of a new experience for them in that regard. We also received feedback from the watchers and candidates, and I'm happy to sort of discuss that with you as we go through this process. Generally, though, the real difference between election judges and watchers is that election judges are trained and appointed to conduct the tasks and processes that are required by the election. The watchers are appointed or names are provided to me by the candidates to observe the steps of the election, the processes. The process for the election, for processing ballots, is designed to ensure that the election judges are able to fairly and confidently identify the total number of votes that each ballot contains, as well as they've received training on signature verification. So signature verification, poll book verification, and ballot counting falls within the purview of the election judges, and the process for this election really was designed around that intent of optimizing the election judges' ability to fulfill their jobs. I would also note here too that the feedback that we received from watchers and candidates, which some of you may be familiar with, regarding the resolution that the board at the last meeting voted to postpone consideration of, did contain many rules or laws, if you will, or references to laws, if you will, that are applicable in the Title I portion of elections. And it's important to note that municipal elections and county and state elections fall into different categories of the Colorado Revised Statutes. Title I is really oriented toward the county and state level elections. Title 31 governs municipal elections. many of the rules proposed in the resolution that was presented by former trustee Gator were really aligned with sort of the rules or laws, if you will, that fall into the Title 31 purview. And they also usually have all the resourcing that's associated with a county level election facility. I think at this point, I'm just we'll address some of these other sort of concepts as we go through the rest of this presentation. There are a few points that I want to make before we kind of dive into that in detail, but I'm very happy to discuss any questions that you might have on that topic. Okay, so moving on here. Next, I'd like to just sort of very kind of give you an overview of a comparison between a local municipally run election and a coordinated election. And the real reason why we're doing this is because the board has alluded at a few points that you'd be interested in considering this. So doing some initial research and making this presentation is appropriate. Okay, so very basically, local regular elections for statutory towns occur the first Tuesday of April of even years. And at that election, very typically, mayor and trustees are elected. Tabor issues may be considered. And then if there's another, say, referred or initiated measure in the town, that's also an appropriate point for a regular election. Regular elections fall outside of the county and state's general elections that occur in November. The Colorado Revised Statutes very clearly distinguish municipal elections from state and county level elections through Title 31. Very interestingly, statutory cities have a different election cycle requirement. Statutory cities are aligned with the county and state elections in November. Okay. The one thing that I'd really like to highlight here about local style elections is that in Title 31, it very clearly indicates that the clerk, and I'm paraphrasing here, designated election official is charged with rendering interpretations and making initial decisions about controversies or other matters that arise in the operation of the municipal election code. What that really means is that when the board appointed me as the designated election official for the regular election, they charged and empowered me to make decisions that turned into processes for regular elections that we then implemented as the election proceeded. And that's very important to note because the municipal election code is somewhat distinct from Title I in its consideration of how elections are structured, because it very, very clearly refers to that role in a municipal election, okay? And it's important to highlight this because, again, if we're looking to compare a locally run election with a state level coordinated election, and we're looking to compare the rules that apply to both of those two scenarios, it's important to note, or to have as a sort of foundational perspective, that municipal elections really charge the designated election person or staff department, if you will, to sort of make these determinations. Okay, moving on then, we'll talk very briefly about some of the functions of coordinated elections. Really, these occur when multiple political subdivisions of an entity, so let's say multiple municipalities in Larimer County, could be school boards or special districts, any political subdivision wants to hold an election at the same time. Typically, this will occur in Larimer County during the November general election cycle. In this case, the county clerk and recorder is the coordinated election official and conducts the election on behalf of the political subdivisions. And these elections are conducted as mail ballot elections. This is stipulated under Title I of the revised statutes. Okay, coordinated election duties here. These are just some delineations, but between what would typically happen between the county staff and the municipal staff level in an election. And really the picture to paint here is that the town's responsibilities include everything that relates to campaign finance filings and preparing the ballot for inclusion in the coordinated election process. Okay. Once that ballot is prepared and handed to the county then takes the ballot, incorporates it into their print, and then is responsible for distributing ballots, collecting ballots, processing them, auditing them, etc. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the sort of historical trends that the town has experienced over the last 14 years, beginning in 2010. all of the elections, save for three, over the last 14 years in the town of Wellington have been regular elections held locally. The exceptions there are 2012, which was canceled. I believe it was because they didn't have more nominations than positions were available to be filled. So by default, they canceled the election and determined that the candidates were elected. And then coordinated elections occurred in 2011 and 2021. You may remember most recently that 2021 election was a election regarding the legalization and taxation of marijuana in the town of Wellington. Okay, this is a chart that should provide you some context on a few things. First, the population overall of the town over the last 14 years. And secondly, the number of votes that the town counted at each election. What I mean by this is the number of ballots that were counted in each election over the course of the last 14 years. Finally, it allows you to distinguish between elections that were held locally here and those that were coordinated. That dashed red line, it's very small, and I apologize, but you should still be able to see it here, makes that distinction for you. Okay, so what's the so what of that? What I'd really like to highlight here is that more than anything else, the town, even though the sample size has only been 2, the town's participation in coordinated elections has been substantially higher than what we've experienced with the local level elections. And there are many reasons why that is the case. It's probably beyond the scope of this discussion for me to go through all of those at this point. And that's really something that kind of is sort of the community's purview. For example, let's say that a marijuana item may be of greater interest to a member of the public than, say, the election of a trustee. Not to discredit the election of trustees, let's say, but simply there are issues that are of greater sort of interest potentially to residents than others. Okay. Very generally, though, what I think that this information demonstrates is that coordinations do tend to experience a higher level of participation than locally run elections. Okay. Next, let's talk through some benefits of coordinated elections. There are arguments which demonstrate that coordinated elections result in increased participation. Again, many reasons for that potentially. One may very sort of off the cuff think that because a voter is able to vote for all their choices in one fell swoop, and it's very clearly understandable when they're supposed to vote and how they're supposed to vote, it makes it easier for people to access the voting process. Another potential benefit would be the potential lower financial burden on taxpayers. And what I mean by this is in a coordinated election, the participants of that election share the costs based on the total number of participants and ballots that go out. So like, let's say in a coordinated election, there are 3 municipalities, 2 state items, and 2 county items. The county, state, and municipalities all collectively share the cost for the municipal election. For the coordinated election in that case. This ultimately could result in a scenario where the town would not be responsible for a large portion of the election costs in a coordinated election, and that dollar value may even be lower than the cost for the town to hold its own election locally. Okay. Another benefit of coordinated elections is access to additional resources, redundancy, and infrastructure. Very obviously, the Larimer County has a much larger staff and infrastructure available to leverage on the conduct of elections. They have voter boxes placed all over sort of Larimer County. They have dedicated counting facilities, dedicated staffs. They have automated processes for processing ballots. And those things, are all available readily in a coordinated election process to participants. And then finally here, a benefit is the lower cost of administrative overhead to staff. Elections are intensive activities for staff, and they do demand a significant amount of time for the folks that conduct them. Coordinated elections ultimately shift some of the administrative overhead to the county partner because some of those tasks the county becomes responsible for during an election. Coordinated election, excuse me. Okay. Moving on to drawbacks of coordinated elections, there are arguments that discuss ballot confusion and voter fatigue. And the point of this is that if there are, let's say, 12 issues on a ballot, a voter may become tired or their issue may get lost in between the 12 items on the ballot. The point there being that it may be more taxing for a person to make informed decisions whenever there are a large number of decisions that they have to make. On the other hand, though, in a coordinated election, voters do receive customized ballots. So let's say the town, for example, did want to coordinate an election, they wouldn't be seeing the same ballot that a coordinated voter in, say, Timnath would see. The ballot measures or issues would be tailored specifically to that voter's registration location. There is a higher potential cost ceiling, as I sort of alluded to previously. If there are a low number of participants in a coordinated election, the participants would then share a higher portion of the cost total associated with paying the county for that election. And then finally, and perhaps most significantly, there are fewer opportunities for a municipality to consider a Tabor issue in a coordinate. If a town is to move its election date for regular elections from April to November. And the reason for that is because Tabor issues can only be considered at regular elections or coordinated general elections. So let's say in the town of Wellington, the voters decided that they wanted to move the election dates for regular elections to November. What that would effectively do is remove one of the 3 opportunities that the town has to consider a Tabor issue in every 2-year period. Okay. What impact does moving the election have on current terms? So the Title 31 talks about how current terms can't be shortened. So if the voters did elect to change the date of elections, trustees whose terms would expire in April would be extended to the November of their applicable year. And then that begs the question of even or odd years. And this is sort of a more nuanced question, perhaps. If the town were to coordinate with the county in even years, the measures to be considered on the ballot would correspond with federal and state general elections. One could then presume that there would be a higher number of total items on the ballot, and correspondingly the town would pay a lower share of the costs associated with that coordination. Odd years then would be state off-cycle and county elections, presumably fewer total ballot measures, potentially higher costs. And I will say that, you know, this question can be very complicated, and is, I think, one thing that I would recommend the board think very seriously about if you did want to move forward with some of the options that we'll talk through a little bit later. This question of even or odd years is very significant and nuanced. Okay. How do you move the regular election to November? So Title 31 talks about how towns are able to ask voters if they would like to change the date from the first Tuesday in April to the first Tuesday succeeding the first Monday in November of even or odd years. The measure can be referred to the ballot by the Board of Trustees if you would like, and there's a procedure for that. What are the required steps? So the first is to conduct with the county clerk and recorder. And the example that I've provided here is if the town did want to move forward with, if the board did want to move forward with referring a measure at this arriving November election. You would first want to provide a notice of intent to the county clerk and recorder no later than the end of July, specifically the 26th. And then there's an IGA consideration process thereafter that would need to be completed by August the 27th before the ballot's finalized in early September. After that occurs, the measure would be referred to the voters at the election in November. And if the measure passes, then the town would establish new election dates or terms by ordinance. It's also important to note here that the same process could be used to return elections from the November date to the April date if the town so desired. And then finally, the proposal of changing the regular election date wouldn't exclude the possibility that the town would still have to conduct its own elections in the case of, say, a special election, a recall election. There will always be a potential for the town to conduct an election. It is still a capability that the town needs to be able to maintain. Okay. Next, then we'll talk through a few options that are available to the town. So the first, and really what I want to highlight here is I'm really looking sort of as your election program administrator to understand what the town would like to do moving forward with its election program. If there is feedback that you have I'm certainly open to it. These ideas, or excuse me, these options really are sort of conversation starters for you to consider about what you would like to see in the town's elections program moving forward. So option one, maintain the status quo. What that would entail is that the regular election dates stay on their current cycle. No changes to the sort of coordination process. The town presumably would not coordinate elections for their regular election cycles. Option two would be to request the use of Laramie County elections, resources, and infrastructure. What this might entail is a collaboration between a few of the towns in Larimer County to, say, rent the use of Laramie County's election infrastructure. And I put this up here because while I've spoken with the current county clerk and recorder about this as an option, it's very likely unfeasible and would potentially be the most costly to the town of all the options available here. That said, it is, I don't even want to say possible, but it's imaginable, let's say. So this is something that I wanted to at least have available for you to discuss. And then options 3 and 4 here really involve the question fundamentally that I have for you tonight is, would you like to coordinate? And then if so, would you like to do that in even or odd years? So the final slide that I have here are these decision points. First, would you like to refer a measure to consider a change of date of the town's regular elections to November? If you would like to do that and the measure were to pass with the voters, would you like to propose coordination in even or odd years? And then finally, excuse me, would you like to propose regular elections in even or odd years? And then finally, if the town's regular election cycle is moved to that November date in even or odd years, would you like to coordinate when feasible? So at this point, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Really, I'm looking for your feedback and your direction on what, again, you would like to see in the town's elections program in the future, though. Even if that's something beyond what I've framed here currently in this presentation. So, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Trustee Lee?
I would love to see a coordinated election, doing it in conjunction with the federal and the state. That'd be the even years. You look at the participation, that's one thing that we always have problems with. We're looking at mail-in ballots and doing all this type of stuff, trying to increase participation. And we really never have got decent participation out of this town. And I think it's going to be fair. I think it's going to be, the election would represent the community. I think the more people you have vote, it's going to be the best way to do it. I think, concerns about, the integrity of the election itself, we got rules, regulations, just like you were saying, we got to go by the state, the federal, and the county governments and all this type of stuff. They got everything in line of what they got to do, how they got to do it, and that type of stuff. And, it's going to take a heck of a lot of work off of you. I mean, I can't imagine the time and effort you put in, and you did a great job, but, you really didn't have a whole bunch of, you kind of made it up. Well, I shouldn't say made it up as you go. You had certain rules, regulations, but you can only do so much at that point. And I know you were, spread pretty thin during that time, and you took time and effort and availability away from the city, what we might have needed you here to do, okay? Again, lower cost. I think that is pretty much an option that we're gonna pretty much see, anytime we can see, we're gonna catch not only better participation, but lower cost. I think that particular part's a no-brainer. Also, too, you're talking about voter fatigue. Oh, I understand what you're talking about, some of the stuff that they get put on a ballot. But again, that just shows you when you guys run a good program or a election like you guys did, getting your name, getting what you're for out there, people are gonna respect that and they're gonna vote for you. Okay, so it's not gonna hurt that particular part, I don't think, on the local. But again, I myself, it's been quite a while ago, but on a local election here for the trustees, I forgot to vote. I mean, it was done. And then all of a sudden, you said, oh my God, what was I thinking? but I never miss a federal and a state election. And again, right, and I think that's gonna be so much better for the town. And one thing that I think we gotta do too, is as far as the term that we're going to, not that I wanna go any further than we need to, but I think, Ms. Gator had brought up a good, idea to, don't do it at the election time, making the transition, do it at the end of the year, that way we can get through the budget. And I think we gotta be concerned about that, right? You know, you'd hate to throw somebody in at the very, right at the end of the year, okay, in a budget, and they have no idea what the process is at that point. So I think we need to look at the time frame on that. So. I think that pretty much covers it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Ken?
Couple of things. First of all, I agree, with Trustee Wiegand that, and you've heard me say this before, coordinated election, if we can get better participation, better voter turnout. You did vote for me, didn't you?
Of course.
Okay. You said you missed it all.
No, not this last.
He did vote for himself.
I just want, oh, you did vote for yourself. I get it now. I joke, but this is a serious matter. I just want to point out something. First of all, special elections are always going to be unique and they're going to pop up. We're going to be contemplating next month, the idea of the home rule question, which would cause two special elections probably next year. One would be to form a home rule charter commission. The other would be going back to the voters with the charter itself for approval. So special elections are always going to pop up. It's always going to be a burden and a cost to the town, whether you do it internally or whatever.
Can I make just a comment there real quick,
Yeah.
Trustee Cannon? Thank you first, Trustee Wiegand, for your comments about it, and thank you, Trustee Cannon, for your comments. What I don't want to make out of this presentation is, for example, a complaint that it's too hard to do my job, okay? That's not the intent of the comments about how it, say, a coordinated election would alleviate staff overhead or administrative overhead, right?
What I was talking about, the efficiency of the staff. Do what you do the best.
And that would be sort of my point is, if it's more important, I think, to communicate or to think about it from a point of administrative efficiency.
Right.
Than it is, anything else. Thank you. Back to you, Trustee.
I wasn't gonna go there, but I thought you did an outstanding.
Thank you.
But folks, we do not have another regular election for 2 years. For 2 years. That's when the next regular election will come about. We have been talking as a board, and we have a work session next month about home rule. And in the home rule, one of the aspects that the Charter Commission has got to address is requirement is about elections, about when those elections be held and so forth like that. So in some respects, it may not be worth the effort to go put together a lot of information for a ballot measure, which could be going back to the voters for another ballot measure should the home rule charter commission get elected. So in other words, why go through the process twice? We've got a 2-year window before this becomes really an issue again. I would lean more toward suggesting that perhaps we have, instead of putting a lot of effort into it right now, since we've got some time, let's see what the charter or the home rule work session goes, and if the board decides to choose to put together a charter commission via an ordinance, it will then go to a ballot measure where a charter commission would be either elected or rejected, probably elected. And then that charter commission would then be addressing that, because then it's still got to go back to the voters in the charter, but it would be all inclusive instead of having 2 questions over 2 successive years about November elections. I'm in favor of November elections. I think, like Trustee Wiegand said, when I don't get confused, there's the federal, there's the state, there's the county, there's the local, and it's pretty simple for me, just That's my thoughts on it, but if the board decides that we want to go ahead and make that effort, I would say coordinate elections on even number of years. Even number of years means to keep the cost down, for us. And I don't care about the odd number of years. Like I said, I don't believe that there's that much voter confusion and those kind of things, but that's where I stand on. But ultimately, I would rather just say, let the charter commission, if that's the direction it goes. And if the board after the work session says, no, we're not gonna worry about that, then we revisit this and put it on a ballot measure. But you got till July the what, 26th?
The 26th, yeah.
Tentatively scheduled, so for the rest of you,
The 30th.
we've met by past mayor, a work session with, severance on July 30th. It's the 5th Tuesday of July,
Okay.
because they have
all reality,
meetings on
I mean-
Tuesdays like us.
You're right, we're not in a rush to do this, and why do the work twice if the board decides to go that direction? You know, we shouldn't be putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, we could do it in a year. I mean, if for some reason the charter stuff doesn't come together,
Yeah.
or the home rule piece, then we could put it on, no, there won't be, we won't have another opportunity.
You're gonna have to hold a special election for anything that's to do with home.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes,
Two-
understood that,
Two
yes.
special elections there.
Mhm.
Are we looking at trying to get this on November's?
I think that was.
I thought that was,
Home rule is later.
yeah, I thought that was gonna be put off till next
The
year.
home rule is next year.
We're not
but-
yet.
But the ballot measure moved. to
Well, I know
November.
what we're talking here.
Uh,
So I mean, it isn't like we're gonna have another election that we're gonna have, even if we do it now.
Maybe just a quick comment on that, and I don't mean to, I certainly understand where you're coming from, trustee Cannon, but I would point out that if such a thing was, if this went to the ballot in November, and the voters very clearly say, we want to move elections to November, the Home Rule Charter Commission should follow that when they create their charter, very simply. So I think we should, I'll leave my comments for a little bit later, but that would be my suggestion, is the commission should follow the direction that the voters choose.
No, and if that's the way we go, I'm all in
Yeah.
favor of that. I was just bringing up the fact that we've got a window.
Yep.
We've got about a year and 9 month window before the next regular election. That we could either put the effort out now, which wouldn't be much of an effort. It's just a ballot question. It's got to be
Yeah.
submitted. There's a little coordination with the county, and it goes on the ballot measure, and the voters can vote. If they deny it, we're still gonna have a charter commission
Mhm.
Yeah,
that could say, no, we want to make it in November.
Okay.
Right.
Fair.
So I'm okay with going ahead.
Either way.
Trustee Teets?
Okay. So my question, Ethan, is if we move to go forward this and send it to the residents for their choosing, would we see in person as well as mail-in? Because we would be going along with what Larimer County does and coordinates.
Yeah, thank you for your question, trustee Teets. The town would have access to all of the county's resources, and rules, if you will, for the elections that they conduct. So all the voting service and polling centers, all the ballot drop boxes, all of those resources would be levied toward the conduct of the town's elections. Does that make sense?
Yes, so and since Larimer County does both in person and mail in, then it would be something that we would look at as well.
that we would do.
We'd be involved,
Yes.
we'd be included in.
Got it,
Yes, so
right,
all the
sorry,
resources-
yes. Okay, perfect. I like the idea of having the option to vote in person or to vote by mail. So that's a huge kudos for our residents that like to keep old traditions, or those residents that have busy schedules and choose to vote by mail. My concern, and I'm not seeing it here, I know we had discussed that we were going to have kind of the cost that other participants that have done this joint effort before, kind of what their costs looked like? Am I missing that in here, Ethan? Did we get
It's,
like an average?
I've not done that analysis. What I have gotten though from the county is guidance about how they sort of proportionally assign those costs. And it's really based on participation. It's very challenging to say what the cost will be for X election because we don't yet know what the participants or the measures will look like. In the 2021 election, the 2021 coordinated election, the town paid, I think, just over $10,000 for the initial portion of the election, which involved, the mailing and initial counting and audit of all of the ballots. There was also a recount cost that the town was responsible for in that election, which I believe totaled somewhere just over $9,000. So in total, in the 2021 coordinated election, the town paid approximately $20,000 for participation in the coordinated election. The presumption then would be that a similar cost level would be applicable in future elections as a rough estimate, if that makes sense.
But that was an odd year.
That was an
That was
odd
an
year,
election, and just.
and there
for
was a
reference-
recount.
Reference, I looked up the 2021 ballot, and on the town of Wellington's ballot, there were 3 state measures and the town of Wellington's measures. So in an even year, you would have 3 pages of ballot, right? So it'd be a very significantly different cost per, but that's kind of the numbers we have right now.
Yes.
That's.
And we're always gonna have the cost divvied out to us for the county, state.
No, we don't pay for county, state, or federal right now. We only pay for local elections.
That's right. Only the local part is the only thing we'd be paying for, or we pay portion of what the county does.
So
No,
from my understanding, the cost of the election is sort of lumped together and participants pay a proportionate share
Right.
to how many items they basically have on the ballot.
Okay,
if that
only
makes
for
sense.
our items.
Right, yeah. So we are paying the county for use of their resources in the conduct of the election. And we participate by adding measures to the ballot and we pay for that directly, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
got it. So we did, in 2021, we did about 25K for the coordinated. In 2022, it was 15K. Was that one coordinated or not coordinated?
Not,
Okay, so and then what was our cost for 2024?
I don't have the final number on that yet for you, trustee Teets.
Okay, is it safe to assume it was under 10,000?
I think it's going to be less than that, but I don't want to give you a number until I have it.
Okay. So, and that right there, I think is one of my hiccups is we're gonna be paying for a lot more, and I understand that it frees up time and stuff like that for our town staff. But my major concern comes is, we're only paying for a ballot measure that is put forward for the town of Wellington? Or are we paying for cost per elector
I'm not
for
quite
the
sure.
all of Larimer County?
Not quite
So
sure
if,
what-
Well, and trustee Teets, I think one thing that's super important to consider here is 2021 was expensive because it was an odd year. So it's gonna be more expensive than general. So if we went even and coordinated, it's most likely gonna be less expensive, depending on the number of items on that ballot and, individuals playing it, but it's still an even year is gonna be cheaper than an odd year no matter what.
got it, but are we gonna be paying for ballot measures for Fort Collins?
No,
No.
So we'll only be paying for a ballot measure that we bring forward.
Well, yeah, we'll pay for the items we put on. So if we put one item on, we pay for that one. We put 2, 3, we just pay for each one for our own local elections. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. So, but then when you look at, remove ballot measures out of it and you just look at, are we paying only for residents of Wellington to vote? Or are we paying for
The-
all?
The county, and we'll have to dig this up, but it's somewhere in the archives, when we did the 2021 coordinated election, the county clerk at the time provided kind of a breakdown of how this is calculated, and they always will do that. So what they do, in a coordinated election, the county is gonna send one ballot to every resident of the county. And so in 2021, they sent one ballot to every resident, and every resident got 3 statewide questions. So right off the bat, the state paid the county for running that election to cover the bulk cost of it, because that's how many residents of the county, we'll say 300,000 residents of the county, 350,000. That had to be done. And then also on that ballot, there were Fort Collins mayor, and so you take then the population of Fort Collins, and for every ballot that the county was already gonna send to residents of Fort Collins, because they were also getting a county ballot, the town or the city of Fort Collins had to pay a portion of that. For Wellington, which is a very small number of residents, so for those, how many ballots did we send out? 10,000, we'll say?
No, we sent out 7,700.
So for the 7,000 ballots that go to Wellington residents, the state pays for a large chunk of them because they have those 3 measures. Then the town is gonna pay for kind of the proportional share of what we add to the ballot, just for those ballots that go to town residents. So the more things on the ballot that affect Wellington residents, the less the town of Wellington will have to pay. For example, in a 2022's election, we had a senator, US senator, we had several state level representative officials, governor, secretary of state, et cetera. Is that last year? Seems like so long ago. So you'll have the state will cover the vast majority of that. Then you have county officials. The county covers another chunk of that, and so it's going to take a huge portion. And then once you get all the way down to Wellington, of the 20 items that the residents of Wellington have to vote on, the town would pay for a few items out of the 20 items for just for those ballots that are coming to town. So, no, we don't pay for anything that's being voted on in the city of Fort Collins. Does that make sense?
Got-
And
Yes.
I'll try and find that contract, and that was all in a board packet back in 2021 when we did that coordinated election. And I can send it to you. There's a large memorandum of understanding and agreement between the county and the town. And it laid out some of that. It's a bit of a complicated calculation, but
So, yeah,
that's all.
very, very
It's-
complicated.
It's,
Yes.
yeah. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
It does, in part. I just want to make sure that we're not going to, when we say we're cost sharing, I just want to make sure it's stipulated that the cost sharing is if we bring additional items and we're paying for Wellington residents. So I just wanted to make sure that that was understood.
Yeah, cost sharing would be proportionate.
Yeah. So my other question that comes out of this is, I know that there was items related to the election integrity, safety, protection of ballots, items like that. My question comes as we will still see special elections, recall elections. I don't know if the home rule would be one of those ones where we have our own election for that item, or if that's a partnership or with the coordinated election. But the items that were presented and the item that was postponed indefinitely, I think that was my understanding, is it was postponed indefinitely. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, yeah.
Was
Definitely to allow for this conversation and for us to bring back up later if we needed.
Bring it back.
okay. So the items that was presented in the ordinance that was presented, I still feel very strongly that that is items, simple standard items that should be addressed as part of our regular elections. And that's ballot protection, security, not leaving ballots unattended with any single member. Ethan, I was there. I got to see all of the coordination. I think you did a fantastic job. This was your first experience ever dealing with an election in general. So walking into that situation and having to make decisions and guide those decisions based off of what was handed to you. I think you did amazingly. Do I think that there was steps that could have been taken to protect ballots better? Absolutely. But there's a lot of things that can be done that, you know, your first time around, it's a lesson, and the second and third time around, you would get better and better walking into that situation. I still feel that ordinance it brought forward has merit and has value, and I felt completely comfortable supporting that ordinance from the beginning and everything that is laid out on it, because it is simple standard items that the state of Colorado also feels is the importance of protecting someone's vote. And I understand that it was less than 1%, and it doesn't matter which way the votes went. It matters that there were votes that were not tallied correctly, that got tallied where they were correctly supposed to be allocated. I think Trustee Moyer picked up an additional vote, as well as Trustee Cannon. It was that person's vote mattered. That person that it wasn't allocated correctly mattered the second time it was counted. So I don't feel that it was a moot point on the recount. I feel that was important. I would be comfortable looking at this. I still would like to know what that average cost was. If you can possibly figure out an average, Ethan, and send it over to us. I mean, are we looking at, if we paid less than 10K for our election now for 2024, and we're looking in 2021, yes, there was additional ballot measures, but that was only 10K of all of that. We're looking at a much higher cost to run a coordinated election. Now it comes with having the opportunity to get to work with Larimer County, and those partnerships are super important. I've had a chance to sit and talk about ballot security and safety, and Miss Tina Harris came and gave a whole presentation at one of the commissioners' meetings that Mr. Kafalis hosts there in town. Feel absolutely confident in what she accomplishes in her position. I just would like to know the financial side of it. I also support looking at that January appointment if we do move the elections to November, because they are walking in to planning that the trustees have done starting in March of that year, where it could very well lead staff in circles if they have 3 new officials sitting on a board that are all giving a different direction than what staff had been planning for since March of that year. So I think that's possibly something to take into account and look at. It is a concern, and I support Christine Gator's stance that getting elected into a budget cycle that's been in discussion since March or April could be seen as interesting for the town staff to have to re-educate or educate again.
Thank you for the feedback, Trustee Teets. I do really appreciate that. Yeah, one thing I think I'll just sort of kind of quickly highlight here is, again, the point that I made about how municipal elections really sort of charge the designated election person to make interpretations and decisions about how the municipal election code is to be run, and then juxtaposing that alongside the resources that are available and the intent that's specified sort of at the end of Title 31, Article 10, about how to construe the article. It says, shall be construed so that all legally registered electors may be permitted to vote, and so that fraud and corruption in municipal elections may be prevented. I'm not a lawyer, but as the town clerk, in my mind, what that indicates is that here are the basic guidelines and the rules that we want you to follow in Title 31. It is you, designated election officials' duty to interpret those and use the resources that you have available to come up with a solution. And so I guess sort of then to answer the question of, do I think more rules could be levied or created for the town of Wellington's elections? Certainly, it certainly is the board's purview to do that if you would like. Do I think that that necessarily is directly aligned with the intent of the municipal election code as exists in the Colorado Revised Statutes specifically for municipal elections? I'm not sure. I also don't know that it's really my place to answer that question. So if the board then does want to move forward with, creating rules for municipal elections, I'm certainly happy to have a conversation with you, about that and to talk through, costs or whatever you would like.
That would be my question. Do we want to get into that? I have very detailed notes as far as.
So right now, no, that's not part of this discussion.
Okay,
Right now, this discussion is, do you support us changing it? And should we hold them coordinated when feasible?
yeah,
That's what this discussion is about. So we're getting in the weeds.
yeah, I do want to be clear, right? I absolutely want to dispel the notion that this board is not interested in election security. That's very silly, right? If we want to have a discussion about that, I'm more than happy to do that. I have
And we
listed
don't. So
every
I'll stop you
line
there.
item for every single one of the
Yeah.
proposed rules, and I'm happy to discuss that. I don't know if it's,
That's not the
tonight's
time.
probably not the right
Tonight's not the night for that.
Oh, I apologize. I thought that's the reason it had gotten moved.
We had postponed that to discuss that at a later date after this work session.
Oh, I thought it was for this work session.
That
I
was indefinite.
apologize.
We didn't know necessarily where this discussion would go, so we didn't want to put a date on it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Trustee Moore?
Yes. So, first of all, I just want to say this, I'm sorry, this has to be said. You, Ethan, did a fantastic job with the election. Today, it was reiterated several times in one of the sessions that I was in that we are the gold standard here in Colorado. And as trustees, if you're appointed to be the election official, and I'm glad you brought that point up, we are entrusting you to be able to enforce the rules and regulations and hold a proper election. I had watchers. The only negative comment I heard from the watchers regarded other watchers that were distracting the judges from counting and being able to do what they were trying to do by chattering in the corner. And so I want to say it publicly that you did a fantastic job. It also was brought to our attention in the session how many duties the town clerk has, and you do a tremendous amount of work. And so for a second to have your judgment questioned, I think is wrong. I think it's about consistency and trust as far as our municipal elections go. I am absolutely, say 98.7% in agreement with Trustee Wygan, and Trustee Cannon here. I believe that we ultimately want the most participation possible. And I don't believe that the cost will be tremendously higher if we coordinate, especially in an even year. And I think that, again, we want the most participation possible, and what we're paying for is not only the ability to vote in person if you choose, but all of the resources that come with coordinating with our county and state and federal elections. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Trustee Daly?
Hi, we are discussing the opportunity to have more voters participate and have better turnout. That's pretty clear to me. And not only that, but we would also, this decision would be the decision of the voters, not even us. So they would get to decide if they want to change the dates and process. And if there were anybody who was concerned with the standards in which we legally operate an election, and they would prefer a different chapter be applied, this would also acknowledge those concerns as well. So if we're talking about giving the voters an opportunity to weigh on how they want to vote, I think that is a great option, and I think we should pursue that.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, well, I think I had proposed this almost a year and a half ago, right? So I absolutely support sending this item to the ballot. Even years, option 3 is the right answer. Certainly, I would absolutely agree that we need to appoint members after budget season. I can't remember what the drop dead date is, Patty, for.
December 15th is when our budget has to be submitted, but we're gonna look to see how late, how far past
I
an
was gonna
election we
say,
can make an appointment.
I'm sure there's a date there,
Yes,
so.
we'll figure that out.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, it should absolutely be after the budget has been passed, though, if that's, assuming that's possible.
Mhm.
If we need to move up the budget a little bit to make that happen,
We
we,
can always work that into calendar.
perfect. But yeah, we should absolutely send this to the ballot. I think, one of the big things here is that, the town of Wellington, we don't, without automated infrastructure, and I know for us over the last number of years, there's been a lot of debate about whether we should do things in person or mail in or this and that and the other. Without automated infrastructure, we have no way to reconcile ballots between in person and mail in if somebody was to vote both. We don't have the ability to do that with a manual counting process, right? So this option,
Let me just stop you there, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. We do, there is a poll book verification process that would catch a double vote.
sure, but this is not without, this would be a fairly significant effort, correct me if I'm wrong.
What would happen is, the poll book judge would, as they're accepting ballots, they make an annotation in the poll book. What would happen is they would receive, let's say, the second ballot in this hypothetical situation. They would see the name and voter ID on that ballot. They would look in the poll book and see that person had already voted. And then that ballot would go into a separate pile.
Sure.
For additional research and investigation.
Sure.
On my part.
Sure.
Initially.
Absolutely, appreciate that, yeah.
Makes sense? Okay.
So in my opinion, having this coordinated with the county, right, makes it very simple for us to do both in person and mail in and have the county resources be able to take care of that. No question, they've done this, they do this every year. So there's no question to me that is the right answer. Certainly going to improve voter turnout. I think the cost increase, if there is one, especially during an even year, is fairly insignificant for the amount of resources that we're getting for what we're paying for, and especially with a significantly increased voter turnout. So I would love to see this go to the ballot. I think it's what we should do.
I'm sorry, I forgot one comment. Can I just-
More.
Thank you. In regards to the appointment and the budget cycle, I just feel honestly like it's on the onus of the candidate to be following along and paying attention. And the board is always going to be in the middle of something. There are several people that will remain on the board that have a very deep understanding of all of the discussion. There are packets and notes and recordings, all of which are available on a consistent basis, if you'd like to do your research. So knowing that the goal is to always be moving forward, I think that it's unnecessary to move the appointments for that one item.
We'll take a look. And we'll also look into what other municipalities do that coordinate, that made that change, how was it handled? Why did they choose that date? What lessons were learned type things, so. And CML will be a great opportunity for us to start talking to some other folks about that.
Perfect. Yeah, I myself am in favor of even numbered years for cost. And I think they should be coordinated when feasible. I don't need to reiterate pretty much what everybody for the most part said. You guys get board direction from us on that?
So let me just ensure that we've coalesced on one of the options, okay? It sounds as though option 3, coordination and even numbered years is what the board would, if to refer to the electors, the option that they'd like to see. So would you then like to sort of move forward with that, consider a resolution to refer a measure alongside additional information that we've discussed this evening.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Trustee Daly, trustee Teets,
Yep.
Okay.
and
Yes.
Yes.
question one, did you move forward?
Unanimous.
You want to restate your question for me, please?
Even
Oh.
years.
Yes, even years.
Okay.
So-
November, even years.
Got it. Thank you. We'll be back with that. I do just want to say to you all, thank you very much for your feedback and your comments, and for your trust. It is being the town clerk, and I think I can also speak for the rest of the town staff. It really is a privilege, to serve the community, and we do really appreciate the trust that you give us to find solutions for the town. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Okay,
That's
the
done.
next item,
Ready?
yes, Senate Bill 24-131 with Mr. Dan Seppi and the,
Okay, Senate Bill 24-131. I wrote a somewhat lengthy memo, so I don't have to repeat absolutely everything in there, but for everybody watching on TV, this is a new state law that prohibits the carry of firearms, whether openly carried or carried with a concealed carry permit, in several new locations. It includes schools, seminaries, et cetera. That doesn't impact the town of Wellington and what we can do because that's a state law. It increases the setbacks, or doesn't increase the setbacks, but it increases the restrictions around polling places. Currently, you're not allowed to open carry around a polling within 100 feet of a polling place during election season. This law changes it so that you also cannot carry a concealed weapon, even if you have a permit around a polling place. The town can't impact that. That's a state law. We do need to put a notice around our polling locations and that 100-foot barrier during election season, around our poll boxes and other things. You need to put a notice out there that says you can't carry a firearm in this area. That would also mean that town hall during election season, because it's near a drop box, that entire building would be covered by the state law. So we couldn't change that. But the ordinance also prohibits the carry of firearms in certain government buildings, state government buildings, courtrooms, buildings used as courthouses, or portions of buildings used as courthouses, and also local government buildings. It covers buildings used for the chambers of a legislative body, buildings that house the office of the executive officer of the municipality, and buildings that are being used for proceedings of a governing body of a municipality. Certainly that would cover the Leaper Center, because this is the chambers of the governing body. It would cover the Municipal Services Building, which is the offices of the executive officer. If this board were to hold a meeting, an official town board meeting, a notice of town board meeting, in the T-bar, for instance, that would be covered by this. And then it would be a state crime to carry a firearm, whether open or concealed in that area. The reason I'm coming to you about this ordinance is there is a provision in the statute authorizing a local government to effectively opt out of those local government prohibitions. There's limitations on what we can do and when exactly. As I said, when it's near a polling place, we can't opt out of that. When it's used as a courtroom, you can't opt out of that. But if the board desires, and this was brought up by Trustee Teets a couple weeks ago at a board meeting, if the board desires, we pass an ordinance to opt out effectively other buildings from the statute. I've talked to a lot of other municipalities, attorneys on this one, and we all thought initially it was pretty simple. And then we all got into it and thought, we got to draft this kind of carefully. So I had a couple questions. I just want to make sure that are answered, and I understand exactly what the board wants. If the board wants to move forward with this, when Trustee Teets brought it up, I think there was kind of broad consent amongst the board. Bring it back. So now I'm here. I've got some specific questions in the memo, and I can get directly to those questions. Or if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer those now.
any questions before he gives us
Gives you the direction on what I want.
his direction, what he wants?
I want to opt out.
No other questions first. Okay. First, does the Board of Trustees want to permit the carry of firearms in municipal buildings, or effectively to opt out of the provisions of Senate Bill 131 that is able to opt out of? And Trustee Wiegand, I hear you loud and clear.
Trustee Ken?
I am not in favor of opting out. I have sat in probably more government board meetings than maybe with the possible exception of Patty. She's been, municipal clerk, now a town administrator. There's been many times when I have felt it's a dangerous situation because of the topics that come up. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a lifetime member of the NRA. I have had concealed weapons permits. I do not carry a gun. I have been trained in combat situations with weapons and I know how to handle myself, but this is not the Wild West. And I don't like the idea of trustees feeling like they have to bring a gun to a meeting to protect themselves. And I don't like the idea of people not coming to voice their opinion to the local government because it's a contentious issue and they're scared about their safety. And there's been enough problems with scares about people's safety, not only in Wellington, but across the country. Just keep the guns out of the government buildings. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Trustee Daly?
Hi, I would definitely love to see this come, as a option to come to, for us to just deliberate over opting out so that we can have as an action item for community participation. I'm gonna guess, I could make a very clear guess on how the people of Wellington feel about this. I won't speak for them, but I can speak for myself. And when possible, I would not want my rights to be taken away for me to carry. So that's my opinion on it, but I would want this to come as an actionable item so that we can hear from the community on how they feel about it. But personally, I would want for us to opt out.
Thank you. Trustee Moore?
Like I said, I think Trustee Daly framed it in a good, perhaps a better way than I had in my memo. The question here tonight is not a decision on this point.
Right.
Should we bring it forward for further discussion with the board? And I'm trying to figure out if I am to bring it forward, we're gonna get around to kind of shaping it and figuring out what we're bringing.
Then I would agree that yes, let's bring it to a
Okay.
public meeting, not a work session, because we're not gonna make a decision tonight.
No.
So,
But,
you wanna bring it to, we'll bring it forward.
but we are voicing opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Personal opinions.
Yeah.
And that helps me in understanding where we're going from here.
I would agree. I would love to hear public comment on this. And I also agree with, I wouldn't want my personal rights taken away. However, I personally felt unsafe at our last meeting, and I do not believe that anyone should miss out on the opportunity to participate in their local government because they're afraid of what the consequences might be. So I'd love more time.
Thank you. Trustee Teets?
I would feel absolutely comfortable moving forward with an opt-out option. So discussion points, points 1, I am not comfortable with infringing on anyone's constitutional rights to carry, no matter what kind of building that is. The taxpayers pay for the buildings that we sit in at this time, and they have rights. I want to say, you look at gun-free zones and you look at the murder statistics in gun-free zones, and that should answer your question right there on, are you safer with or without guns in areas in the US in general? So if the board wants to permit the carrying of firearms, are there limits to who or how? No. The Constitution pretty much states what those limits are, and the right to keep and bear arms is specifically stated therein. So that answers that one. So allow concealed carry and allow open carry, because that's what the Constitution allows as well. In addition to elections and court times, are there limits to when that is desirable? From my understanding, Dan, it's not our choice related to elections and court times. There's still those rules and regulations that revolve around
Correct.
those, correct? Got it.
Around elections, near polling places, and during court times, there is no option to opt out of it. That's not, the question will be, are there additional times when we should not opt or out? So
Okay.
kind of, do we want to limit the opt out in some other way? So I'm trying to, that's what I'm trying to get at there.
Okay.
But I think trustee teacher answered probably no to that.
Correct. Yep. So nope, I would actually love to be able to support everyone's freedoms and opportunities. So that one, I would have to say I'm an opt out, and I would love to see it come for public comment.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
I would have to totally agree with trustee Teets in this regard. I would love to see the broadest possible opt-out that we can and bring it up for a discussion, so.
Yep, I'm right there. Trustee Teets, Mayor Pro Tem. Broad stop out possible.
Broadest. And so getting back to the first few, I mean, the next question is really around kind of scope. I've talked to a number of municipalities that are working on this, and they're saying allowing concealed carry for elected officials and employees in these buildings, right? So it's not the fullest possible opt-out. It's been saying that elected officials and employees of the town are able to carry in these buildings if they have a permit. And so there's really, with regard to this opt-out, there's options here, and if desired, or the statute fully would allow just opting out.
I mean, by the
So,
sounds of the board, I'd say we'd need a few options to discuss.
you know, bring back a few options around that, and we can debate them or you can discuss them then.
Yeah.
Bring us some
I'm
options.
hear public comment at that time too.
Okay, I can do that. All right.
Cool.
Well,
A
that's
quick-
enough for me.
A
That's
quick,
enough for me. I can draft an ordinance. We'll bring it back quickly. Because of CML, this will probably be July, but it'll be soon because the statute goes into effect soon.
Yeah, trust,
When does it go into effect?
July
January?
1st.
July
July
1st.
Was-
1st.
who was online that was trying to say something?
it's Rebecca.
Okay, trustee Daly.
Okay, as part of this, as a consideration, I think, we should additionally consider a lot of other municipalities have used like bulletproof glass for their municipal buildings, for example. Like for our building, I think that would be a good choice as an addition to this, just to make sure that staff and know that we care about their safety. But we're also, facing constitutional right concerns. So I think paired with this decision, we should probably consider for budget, improving security as well.
All around.
Yeah,
It's a budget issue.
Budget issue. I don't know what Kevlar costs anymore. I'll figure that out.
I'd go grab
Well,
one.
You
One
go
thing,
grab some for me, we'll
Yeah.
just throw it up
one thing
there.
I gotta make a comment.
I already have some.
Awesome.
When you apply for a concealed weapons permit, they dig awful deep in your background. So I mean, those are the people, most of the time, that's who you want to have armed. It's the ones, I mean, the people that commit the crimes, most of the time, not always, are the ones that are criminals that don't follow the laws anyway.
And this is great to bring to the meeting.
Yeah.
I was
So-
gonna say, save your ammunition. for
Save-
later.
Yeah, but again, that's something to think about
yeah.
on it, yeah.
There's a lot to it.
Okay, I have enough to draft an ordinance, and we'll bring it back.
Perfect.
So wonderful, thank you.
Our work session is a wrap.
Hey,
Thank you.